timing in dating is everything. For instance, if I were to meet my girl 4 years ago, maybe she would think I was unattractive and we never would have talked for real. But in the story I'm about to tell you, this girl that I ended up talking to for the course of months, if she hit me at the right time, I probably never actually would have talked to her extensively. One fateful day, I'm on TikTok Live. And when I'm on TikTok Live, usually I'm getting a bunch of thirst comments, people trying to slide in my DMs, etc., etc. And this one young lady, she was really like kind of hammering home the point. She was like, oh, like, I want to put you on the roster, yada, yada, yada. Now, mind you, at this time, my brand was having a roster. So I was like, okay, why is she trying to like big dog me in my comment section? It's kind of odd. I clicked on her username. I saw her profile picture look good. I was like, oh, like, I'm going to tell her to slide through. And then I told her, I was like, yo, my DMs are open. Basically, after I got off the live, I checked my DMs and she was in there immediately. She's like, yo, this is me sliding in your DMs. I'm like, hey, you're really fine. And she says, thanks, Papa. And then she says something else. But like, she says, thanks, Papa. And I'm like, that's interesting. Because, I've heard, daddy, I've heard Poppy, which again, that's kind of like inherently like pushing the needle a bit, into like the bedroom athletics type direction. But again, we just started talking. This is our first real interaction. So is she probably trying to sleep with me now? Like, yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, again, like that's you're kind of pressing the matter a bit too much. And you'll see that moving fast was low-key her entire thing. Okay. A few messages later, she's like, oh, we should FaceTime. I go look through her account. She looks really good. So I'm like, okay, bet. And then we FaceTime and then everything's fine. But then like our ages come up. Okay. And we have a massive age gap. It's like 7 years. It comes up in conversation that she's 27. Okay. Now do the math. I'm 20 at this point. Now, mind you, she did not look much older than me, even though some people say I look 30, so that might not be like a major thing, but she like looks, I thought she was maybe like 22, 23. Now I'm thinking, okay, until she can't resist me, I kind of have to keep my age under wraps because I know how people get about that, okay? They get like, especially women, they get really weird when you're younger than them, even by like 1 year. So her being 7 years older than me, she'd probably tweak out, right? However, at some point it came up in the conversation. I was like, oh yeah, my birthday's coming up. And she's like, how old are you turning? I'm like, I'm turning 21. She paused and looked at me crazy because the thing is, again, people think I like look 30, so they're very surprised to find out like I'm my age. She's like, oh, I thought you were at least like 25, like you carry yourself and you look like a lot older. And I'm like, yeah. And eventually she stops tweaking about it, but like again, like this is an interaction that happened, mind you. And also I'm gonna put a shirt on real quick. And then keep in mind, okay, at this point the way she had been talking so far is very clear that she was from a predominantly black area, a more urban area as it were, okay? Because they talk a bit differently, like they're just a bit shorter, like you can have a longer conversation, but just the dialect completely different, okay? Also keep in mind, this is not a black woman, okay? She's Asian. Now, some of you know that a lot of my exes have been Asian, okay? But I promise you, it is not a Childish Gambino situation. I'm completely normal about it. It's just a big coincidence. As a matter of fact, this young lady, I thought she might have been Mexican. And I've dated plenty of women who are not Asian, okay? But more on that later. It's gonna be an important thing. We get off the phone, we're like, oh, that was super nice. Yeah, we should do it again sometime, whatever, whatever, whatever. Mind you, after this, I low-key, I don't ghost her, but I don't talk to her for like a week or two. Because plainly, I have a roster and it is very expansive, okay? I had a lot of people to entertain at the time. She kind of just fell off a bit. Then I would come back because she posted something on her IG story and I'm like, oh man, she does look good. So then I slide back in. And mind you, something I forgot to tell you, she is an exotic dancer. Mind you, I've never been the person to have a problem with anybody who does that or like has an OF, anything like that. So I completely saw her as an eligible candidate if I did want to date her monogamously. However, I did not want to date her monogamously. I had no intention. Again, she was just on the roster at this point. But I will say this logic kind of hinged upon the fact that at this point, I had not been in a relationship in years, okay? So I didn't realize how I would be if I actually was in a monogamous situation with one person. Because in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm literally sleeping with other people. I think I can manage talking to someone who strips. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be a big deal because I'm doing like the most I can do. I'm still like that to this day, okay? Like, if we agree that we are not in a monogamous relationship and you're sleeping with other people, as long as I'm also sleeping with other people, I'm not going to trip, okay? And that's why I never understood why people have certain problems. Like, I feel like if someone has a problem with like, someone like they're involved with like sleeping with other people, it's because they're not, or they feel like they sleep with like less people or something like that. For me, it's not really a competition. It's like I get to do what I want, you get to do what you want, everything's cool. However, when that happens, there is a degree of separation because it's like I can't be talking to you every day, linking up with you every day, and then like one day I'm like, oh, I gotta link up, and you're like, nah, I actually gotta sleep with someone else. I would not be able to handle that. As long as there's a respectful amount of separation, it's whatever. So she can dance on these other dudes for money, and I don't really care because it's like I'm again sleeping with other people, texting other women, like doing all the whole 9 yards, all right? But anyway, she'd basically post something from the club, and I'd be like, oh, like you look good. Now it's funny, she would like literally post herself dancing, and I'd be like, oh, like look at your smile. Because again, I hate something else that's gonna come into play later. I'm not one for very like promiscuous comments, if that makes sense. Like I'm not into like, the like, oh, like texting like we're about to sleep with each other. Like now I'm a man of action, okay? Like I'd rather do that in person. Anyways, we talk here and there, and something else I found out, she was like 4'10", 4'11". Okay, now mind you, I'm 6'6". bit of a height difference, right? What's crazy, when I told people that, they were like, oh, like, what are you, like, into kids or something? I'm like, bro, she's 27. Like, what are we talking about? Something I want you to understand is if I saw a 4'10", 4'11" young lady in public, I most likely would not want her, not really, like, think about approaching her, anything like that, okay? Just because, like, not that I prefer taller women, but 4'10", 4'11", that's way too short, okay? However, again, we met through technology, so that's how it became okay. Like, if I meet someone through technology first, like, what am I gonna do? Even before this story took place, like, I've talked to women who were 4'11" before, and it always was a situation where, like, oh, we meet on a dating app, they slide in my DMs, and basically it's like I see them, like I see like the face card, I'm like, okay, bet. And it's like, then I find out they're 4'11", which is crazy. When I tell you, I did not think that was like a real height until I got to college. But I will say, okay, this young lady that the story's about, she did say something to me that was troubling one time. She was like, Bryce, you know it's gonna be a thing. And I was like, what are you talking about? She was like, our size difference. She was like, we can't ignore it. Like, it has to like be a thing. And I'm like, I don't know if I want it to be a thing. Like, I'm like, I understand what you're saying, but like, I don't know. Remember, keep in mind, this young lady, she called me Papa. Okay, she didn't call me Poppy, did not call me Daddy, and I know I'm hammering home this point, but I really need you to understand, she called me Papa specifically. You may ask yourself, how did I let this slide? Okay, the thing is, in my mind, Papa was close enough to Poppy that I was like, okay, I'm just gonna say it's the same. Okay, however, other things she did later on kind of made me realize that that was my first red flag. Basically, again, we would be talking on and off, okay, and I would always be the one to go ghost, not purposefully, nothing like that, but again, had a roster to manage. Okay, I had a lot of other women to deal with at the time. But the one thing about her is whenever I spun the block and came back, she was never tripping about it. She was always cool. She was like, oh, like, don't worry about it. What's up? And then we just have a conversation. I really like that. I find that very attractive when I can kind of not talk to someone for like 2 weeks. That's actually a test I always do. I always like see if I can not talk to someone for a week or two. And when I come back, I see the energy. And if their energy is good, that's why I'm like, okay, this is someone who can really stick around. Because mind you, some people tweak about that. Okay, I'll never forget. I remember one time, me and this girl, we had a magical night together. Basically, she hit me up and then like we were talking for a bit. I left her undelivered for, I don't even think it was like a full week. It was like a few days. And I came back and I was blocked. I'm like, how are you going to block me for not texting you? Like, now I can never text you. Okay. Now you'll never know what our future could have been. Basically, one day I hit this young lady up and she's like, oh, do you want to talk before I go to work? I'm like, yeah. So we're on FaceTime, we're talking. And then like she's driving to work. And then like when she's at work, you know, we stop talking, obviously. However, a few hours later, she calls me from work. She had been drinking. Obviously, something a lot of dancers do is drink on the job so they can have more fun or whatever. So basically, she calls me in like the middle of her shift. Like she's in like the changing room or whatever. She's in the back. She sets the camera up, starts shaking it. And again, the thing is, I don't really like that, okay? Because what do I say? I'm so far away, can't grab it, can't, you know, like position myself in front of it. What am I supposed to do, okay? But she does it. I'm just like, literally just smiling at the camera because like again what am I supposed to do with that? But she's like, oh, you know, I just want to go home and talk to you. And I'm like, okay, the magic's working. So basically, I don't know how it works at like other, like I don't know if it was just like the place she was working at, but basically she could like leave and like come in whenever she wanted. Now I think she had her shifts where she had to come in, but she could leave whenever she wanted. So she was like, oh, I got the amount of money I wanted, so I'm just gonna dip. And in my mind, I'm like, don't you need to hustle a bit more? Like in my mind, if I got the amount of money I wanted in like 2 hours, I would stay there for the rest of the night. Like, think about how much money she could have got. But I feel like she didn't really care about the money. So basically, she goes home, and I think she either took friends with her or like was like dropping them off or something. So basically, I was on the phone and her friends were around, and like every once in a while they'd be like, "Oh, like who's that? Who's that?" And she's like, "It's my man," like giggling, and I'm like, "Oh, so I've upgraded to like man tier already." Mind you, this is like our first day like FaceTiming at this point. When I say first day FaceTiming, I mean because after this, we proceed to FaceTime almost every day. So she's doing all this. She's calling me her man. When she's talking to me, she's kind of being like a little bit lovey-dovey to me. Nothing like too crazy like in front of her friends, but she's talking to me very affectionately. Now, mind you, again, up to this point, me and her, we had just been texting like barely, like on and off, like throughout the weeks. The thing is, I don't know what it is about me, but women fall for me fast, okay? Even when I feel like I'm giving them nothing to like fall for. Like again, me and her were talking, but like I wasn't really like putting the moves on her because I had a lot of other stuff going on. Like I'm telling you right now, if you were to put me on like Love is Blind, Love Island, oh man, bro, the young ladies on that show, they'd be cooked, okay? They'd be like whoever I got paired up with, like, bro, they'd be fit. There'd be nothing they could do. I feel like a lot of guys say that, but you don't understand. Like, I could be barely talking to someone, and they'll be like, "Oh, like we're soulmates," ha ha ha, like tee hee hee as a joke. But also, you don't say that as a joke, and that's why I low key get into a lot of shenanigans. Because the thing is, again, they start feeling me so fast that they feel like I owe them things. So when I'm in certain situations, like, oh, I'm talking to someone else, blah 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 blah, they get an attitude about it because they feel like me and them should be together when that's not really the case. They think just because they like me so much that now we're destined to be together, and like, you know, I have to end up with them, which is not the case. However, the thing is, once they give me that little inkling of like, I'm kind of a little obsessed with you, more obsessed with you than I should be, that's when I sink my teeth in. Okay, that's when I start love bombing. I'm a big love bomber. Like, when I tell you, I am truly like a slow burn romantic. Like, it takes me a lot to feel things for someone, but I'm also low-key a sociopath. And it's like, I want to see what happens when I love bomb you and like you're coming to me with a certain energy. I want to see what happens when I match it and like up the ante. Sometimes I feel like people I talk to be dragged now, okay? Like I remember one time actually this happens a lot. Like I'll call a young lady baby and then they'll think that's like, whoa, like I'm already baby, I'm already bae. And it's like, what are we talking about? Like this is very basic stuff here. Basically, shorty in the story, it's very clear that she's feeling things for me super strongly. So now I'm starting to lay it on her. Like, you know, I'm super excited about you. I haven't felt like this in a long time. It's crazy, you know, when we're not talking, like I miss you. Like I miss talking. I really like talking. I love hearing your voice. Like it makes me smile, blah, 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 blah. I'm a sweetie pie. Not only am I low-key sociopathic in the sense where I want to see how far I can push them, but also I love like in my narcissist in me wants like the boost of confidence that them like being super in love with me gives me. So me and this young lady are talking a bit more, okay? And remember what I said in the beginning about timing? This was very important, okay? Because the timing was summer break was just about to start, so pretty much everyone was leaving campus, so a lot of my roster was no longer there. So me and her had a lot more time to talk because I just wasn't doing as much. We were talking more, right? And very quickly, I found out she's not at all about the bag, okay? Like sometimes she would show up to work and just leave because again, she's like, oh, like I want to talk to you, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, we can talk when you're off work. The thing that made it crazy to me is I knew she wasn't in the best living situation, right? Like she had a lot of stuff happen to her that wasn't her fault. So it kind of put her in a situation like, you know, she's staying with family, like stuff like that. But my thing is like, if I'm in a situation where I'm staying with family and like there's this like thing that I do where if I spend more hours at it, I'm gonna make so much more money. I'm gonna do that thing. My sister was on that too, okay? My sister wasn't a dancer, but basically she was doing like spiritual stuff and she got like 200 plus like per session, right? My thing is like, if I get 200 per session of anything, I'm gonna book more sessions, but she wasn't on that type of timing. It was something like, oh, like it was tiring, it wasn't fun. But I'm like, yo, like 200 a session, you can make life-changing money if you get a bunch of sessions going. So I just, it like hurts me to think about that concept. When I realized how much money TikTok was giving me, I literally made 2 more TikTok accounts. Some people just aren't about the hustle. Because again, my thing is like, you know, if you want to get out of a particular situation and you low-key have the opportunity to do that by building like capital over time, then do that, okay? Now, however, her thing is that like, to be honest, she didn't like working. She didn't like doing what she did. Apparently there was a lot of drama with like girls like who were working with her. And it's like, you know, I understand like you not wanting to be in that kind of environment, but still like money-wise. Oh, and you know what she told me? My friends hate this information, but like, I don't know why. Like, because in my opinion, I get it, but like they always think it was like the worst thing ever. But I'm explaining to you right now. Basically, she told me when it's a date, she wants to get like a lot of money. She would pull up to like the club in pigtails, right? Because a lot of men are like creepy and like they would give her more money if she had the pigtails in. And remember, she's also very small. When I tell people that, they're like disgusted with her. But in my opinion, I'm like, bro, if the guys are gonna be creeps and she's just benefiting monetarily from them being creeps, then I don't see the point. You know what I mean? Like in my opinion, it would be one thing if she was like actually like a kid, like trying to get with grown men. But it's like, bro, she's like 27 years old, and it's like these men are like kind of like envisioning her as a kid, and that's why she's getting more money. And the thing is, if they're not gonna do it to her, they're gonna do it to somebody else. So it's you know, I don't see the issue with this specifically. Now, mind you, I see an issue with those men, but I'm saying I don't see an issue with her doing that. Something that's gonna come up later: tremendous mommy issues this woman has. Okay, personally, me, women I get involved with, a lot of times they have mommy issues because I feel like I give such like motherly vibes, like I'm being so serious, that like they just kind of like sense like they want me to fulfill a maternal role, if that makes sense. Because truthfully, I'm such a supportive guy. Like in all seriousness, I'm always like, oh, you know, good job, I'm so proud of you. I feel like that's what moms did to a lot of kids growing up, or like they should have done to a lot of kids. So when there's problems with the mother, I feel like sometimes they look at me to like replace the mother that did such a poor job. Hold up, let me know something in the comments. I know I'm doing a lot of side yapping about like, oh, you know, this is how I felt about this, you know, this is my mindset when it comes to this. I feel like some stories like I can tell straight through and just like tell them straight through, and that's how they're better. But sometimes I feel like there are stories where I need to give you like little tidbits of like what was going on, like deeper, like more context, and also my mindset, so it makes sense like what I did in the story. When I'm kind of rambling about like, oh, you know, this is how I feel about this, you know, or this is how I feel about that, I want to know, like, is that okay with you? Like when I go on these like little tangents, or do you just want me to shut up and get on with the story? I can lie, I don't think it's gonna change what I do, but do let me know what you think, okay? So maybe I can put some effort for it. But anyway, she had problems with her mom, and the thing is, her mom like beat her. Her mom put her hands on her. And my thing is, call me insensitive, but I feel like if your parent hits you, you should just stop loving them. Okay, like am I crazy for that take? If my mom put her hands on me, first of all, growing up, and I grew up and got out the house, I wouldn't talk to her. But if she put her hands on me like now, like I'm a grown man, I'm absolutely not talking to her. So I don't understand how people like love their parents and are still like, oh, you know, but that's my mom though, after she hit you. So that was something I never understood about this girl. It's like, why do you love your mom so much when everything you tell me about your mom is so horrible? Like she's like the worst person. It makes no sense. This woman, extremely family oriented, okay? That's why I realized I could never date someone who's actually family oriented. That's gonna be a bigger plot point later, but like she was super weird about it, trust me. Now I'm gonna tell you about the first fight me and her ever got in, okay? Basically one day we're on FaceTime, she's looking through like couples questions, right? She looked them up, like questions like to get to know somebody, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And basically the question comes up like, what do you think their type is, right? And she says, if I were to guess, I would say white women. Now, mind you, again, this is an Asian woman who I'm clearly interested in, clearly talking to, telling me that she thinks my type is white women. And something that I'm sure she knew growing up in a black area, and something all black people know, is getting accused of liking white women is like a black person calling you the N-word. Like it's the equivalent. Like as a matter of fact, I would rather a white person call me the N-word than a black person accuse me of being a milkman. Like it's just, it can't be, it doesn't get worse than that. Sorry, I got a little chilly. But anyways, the thing is, the root of that is very anti-black, okay? Because a lot of times in certain black men who talk a certain way, who carry themselves a certain way, oh, they must like white women. Because mind you, at this time, I think I had twisted, my hair was done. Like it was no like, oh, he has a smash bro cut, he likes white women. It's because I talk like this, okay? Because I speak with so much power, because I don't use AAVE, okay? I use very traditional, proper English, all right? Now, mind you, this is because my mother, who was a black woman, both of my parents are black, went to college, English minor, I think she was like a child development major. So basically, I had no choice but to talk like this. Remember how I told you at the very beginning of us talking, she was kind of like speaking in a very like hood AAVE way. At this point, she kind of talks like this. Okay, it's a horrible impression, but just trust, like she's talking like this, and she's like talking like very normal. I cannot emphasize how horrible of an impression that was. If you're watching this, I'm so sorry. I know you didn't sound like that. But the point is, she was not using AAVE like that, right? And that, again, will come back later, okay? But basically, she says that she thinks my type is white woman, and I literally like, I think I get like real quiet. I'm like, oh, like, what are you talking about? Like, why would you say that? But then I'm being like very short with my answers because I'm extremely mad. Like that accusation always makes me so mad. Because again, it boils down to the fact that I don't speak like I'm from an urban area. I don't use AAVE, which should not at all be the measure of a black person. Because again, telling a black person that it seems like they date white people is kind of like telling that black person that they're less black than other black people. That's always been how it is. It's crazy because some people try to pretend that's not what it is, but it's exactly what it is. I remember one time this other girl, she said that I seem like I dated white women. And I started pressing her about it. I brought up the issues. I was like, oh, like, it's because I talk a certain way, blah, 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 blah. And she tried to tell me, she was like, no, it's just because most handsome black men I see are like only into white women. And I'm like, please. Like she's trying to schmooze me to save it. Now, mind you, it did work because I 100% dropped it after that, okay? However, deep down, I knew like that was all cap, okay? So again, super furious when people bring that up. Editing BRs here, but the thing about them bringing it up that always bothers me is it's always a non-white woman telling me they think my type is white women. It's like, why am I with you if you're not my type? We're already dating, sleeping together, or in a talking stage, whatever, right? Like you're already here. Like what? Like where's the confusion? You just think I spend my free time talking to women I'm not attracted to? Like you understand? You're like an idiot for thinking that, right? Like. Back to the story at hand. Again, I'm giving her short answers. I'm clearly very upset. And she's like, oh, like, you know, I see you're in a bad mood. Like, let's just get off the phone. I'm like, okay, yeah. And then I think I text her later. I'm like, oh, yeah, that really upset me. And then I explained the whole thing about, like, you know, not using AAVE, you know, people thinking, like, because you talk a certain way that you're, like, less black. Basically, how there's a vision of black people where it's like, if a black person is speaking proper English, that's something that's wrong or less black. Because, again, you're implying that, like, someone who speaks proper English is more white. Therefore, people who can't speak proper English are more black, which again is kind of promoting an ideology of black people being less intelligent. And she was like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I never looked at it like that. I guess that was super ignorant of me, blah, blah, blah. Very good apology, okay? Handled it. Now we're back. We're cool again. There's no issues. Anyways, okay, mind you, it's summer break. I'm staying at school a bit longer for summer break. I had like some stuff going on, so I had to stay there before I actually went home. So again, I had nothing really going on, so I was just talking to this young lady every day. So now things are kind of becoming more serious just because we're talking every day and I don't really have any other options to interact with. But then I do end up going home. I end up staying with my mom for the summer, right? And then me and my mom are chatting. We're updating each other on life. I'm like, oh, you know, I'm talking to this girl. I'm giving her all the stats. Okay. I'm like, she's 27. And my mom's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, oh, like, you know, she's an exotic dancer. My mom's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, she's 4'11". And my mom, she doesn't flip out, okay? But she's like, oh, Bryce, like, come on. Like, she's so short, you know, when you hold hands, it's gonna look like that's your kid. And I was like, okay, mom, first of all, I don't hold hands. I'm not a PDA guy, okay? I'm not holding your hands. You're not a child. My mom's like, what? You have to hold hands. That's how people know it's your person. I'm like, no, 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 no hand holding. Okay, it's not gonna happen. But basically, she's like, oh yeah, like I'm not gonna cook for her because she's so short. My mom is really like weird about height. But mind you, my mom's 5'6". Like, she's not tall enough to be like this elitist when it comes to height. Anyways, okay, I'm still talking to Shorty, but now I'm home for the summer, okay? So I have a lot more time on my hands. I'm not worried about school, anything like that. And one day she drops the news to me. She's like, oh, like, did I mention to you that like I've been married before? And I was like, no, you didn't. She basically tells me, she's like, yeah, I used to be married to this guy. Like, they met like in high school or something. Like, she was, how old was she when they got married? I think she was like 19, I believe. Okay, he was actually. I'm not gonna give you too much detail because I want her to have some like plausible deniability in case like someone's like, oh, is this a video about you? But anyways, they get married. He cheated on her with a man. She called him, and that's when they broke up. Which is kind of odd. Okay, and I'm gonna tell you why it's odd. Apparently, before that, she knew that he was cheating on her like with a bunch of women, and also she had been cheating on him. Now, mind you, this man was very like problematic. Like, he was keeping her trapped in the relationship. It was horrible. I think she was like financially dependent on him. And yeah, he was basically trapping her in this relationship. Kind of funny. I've messed with a lot of women who've had like previous men cheat on them with men. And I'm like, what? You think it would make them scared of like men like me? You know what I mean? But she was super into me being feminine. You know, she's like, oh, like I like the earrings. You know, she like, I think she suggested I wear eyeliner before. Like, so she was very oddly into that for someone who had been like in this situation. But also, she did seem to have some homophobia on her at the same time, given what she had been through. Because I want you to think, okay, you're in a situation, you're married to this guy, he's laying his hands on you, he's cheating on you, and you're basically like, like I can't get out of this situation. You know, he's cheating on you with women right now, to your knowledge. You're like, I can't get out of this situation. What do I do? But then all of a sudden you find out he's cheating on you with men, and just magically now you can divorce him. Oh my gosh, but actually, she was technically still married when we were talking. That was the craziest part, because you know, if for some reason, this is a ridiculous law. If someone like doesn't sign divorce papers, they can low-key like keep like married for like a very long time. But I think there's like a timing thing that goes off where it's like if they don't sign it after a certain amount of time, then you just legally are divorced. I don't know the legal jargon of it, but basically it was coming up soon. I remember at the time we were talking where like she was going to be officially divorced soon. But you know what I mean though? It's like, oh, like, you know, you have a big problem, like this guy's cheating on you, you can't leave him, blah blah blah. But then all of a sudden when it's a man, now you get it. Now for some reason you can dip, okay? But again, I don't know the whole situation, so I'm not going to get on that too much. However, I will say she would always bring up stuff like, oh, you know, he was treating me that way just because he was battling that he was gay, blah blah blah. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, he was also like cheating on you with women. You know, like, let's not forget that too. So I'm like, how gay could he be? She was doing the age-old thing that a lot of women do where it's like, oh, you know, my ex, he just straight up didn't like women. He just wasn't attracted to women, so there's nothing I could do. And she had the proof of him sleeping with a man to kind of be like, oh, like, it helped her push that gay agenda. But again, it's like he was also sleeping with women. Sounds like more women, as a matter of fact. You know what's crazy? She said something where it's like, he literally was like with like this woman that she knew he was like cheating on her with, and he was like, nah, it's not happening. And basically it definitely was happening. Like, it happened like in such close quarters to her. It was crazy. I know that's such a vague way to tell the story, but basically it's like she practically like saw it happen before her eyes. Like, when it came to again, when it comes to the women thing, it's fine, but then it's like, oh, he cheats on you with a man, now you can just break up with him. So she had a lot of residual homophobia, right? And she was not trying to eat it from the back. And here's the thing, I know like this is like the second, third video in a row where I've talked about like I like getting eaten from the back. I promise you, like, it's not a necessity to be with me. Like, if someone doesn't eat it from the back, I'm not going to break up with them. Actually, I'm not going to lie. After long enough, I might, okay? But things, I would try to power through it, you know, if I truly love somebody. But again, mind you, at this point, we're still just talking. Like, we're not at all monogamous. And, like, I think, I don't know at this point if we've had the conversation, but it was clear that we were not monogamous, okay? Neither of us had anything resembling that expectation of each other. But one day, we're basically talking to her friend and her friend's boyfriend, and her friend was like, oh, like, I don't think I could date a guy that's been with a man before because I feel like he'd have expectations of me that I wouldn't meet, such as eating it from the back, right? That was the example that was used. Now, mind you, when that topic comes up in conversation, I always get really quiet because I know I've had it eaten from the back before and I don't want to become the face of it. And again, it's not something that I'm going to break up or stop talking with someone over. But basically, when that happens, they ask the friend's boyfriend, like, has he gotten it eaten before? He's like, oh, no, absolutely not. And then they ask me, and I'm like, yes, I have. Because things, I'm not going to lie about it either, okay? But the thing is, a lot of women get defensive when that gets brought up because, again, they're scared that's going to be a big thing. So she's like, oh, like, I'm not going to do that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's perfectly fine, whatever. Kind of starts like a little fight between us because, again, I didn't like the way she, like, approached, like, the situation. Because, again, she's acting like I'm asking her to do it. And I'm like, I'm not asking you to do it. However, I will say she was a self-proclaimed freak, and how freaky can you be as a woman if you're not eating it from the back? As a man, if you're not tossing a salad, you're not freaky. You're simply not. That is literally like level 1 of being freaky. So stuff like that would come up, right? And like she'd be reading something and say something about bisexual men, and she'd basically be like, oh, well, you're not bisexual, are you? And I'd be like, because again, I don't like giving answers to people about my orientation. And she would like really start to press me about it, and I still wouldn't be giving an answer. I could see it made her very uncomfortable. irritable, very antsy. But mind you, okay, she had this mindset, but this woman herself, bi, completely bi. Like, she was into women. Now, mind you, she was kind of a fake bi. Like, apparently she wasn't willing to like eat it. You know what I mean? And I'm like, come on, you kind of got to eat it, like, at that point. But I still consider it bi because, you know, you're letting women do that to you. You're kissing, you're making out with women. Yeah, like, you're bi. However, you do have to step it up, all right? But again, it is weird that you, a bi woman, is being weird about a bi man. But obviously, like, in this climate of 2024, 2025, like, we all know like how people are towards bi men. She very much had like the homophobia, biphobia bone in her body. Like, again, I don't know if she was like this before her husband, but like definitely after everything happened with her husband, she got a bit homophobic. Now, mind you, some information you might find important, she didn't tell me she was married until after we told each other that we loved each other, okay? Now, mind you, did I love her? No. Okay, I was love bombing, but she got to me first, told me she loved me, so I said it back. You know, this is what I do. Mind you, I honestly did not care that she was married, okay? Like, I legitimately dated women who, like, their husbands were in their lives still, and they were still, like, she had nothing to do with her husband, so I didn't really care. I was not competing with him whatsoever. And the thing is, even if I was, I wouldn't care, okay? Because things, when you date a woman who has a husband, you're playing with house money at that point, okay? Again, they're already married. Everything you do going in, like, say you start, like, dating her, and then, like, she pulls away and she goes back to her husband, well, you know, what were you really gonna do, okay? They were already married. But there is the chance, or I don't know, sometimes it's a lot more likely, they like pull towards you because they don't want to be with their husband in the first place. Again, it's like a win-win. And again, if they pull away from you, it means nothing because they were already married. So I always love talking to women in relationships. Okay, but anyways, the way we told each other we loved each other, I remember she kept saying like she missed me. Like, she said it a lot. And then like she got to the point, she's like, when I say I miss you, I'm really saying something else. And I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, what are you saying? She was saying it a lot, okay? Like, she was like, oh, like, you know, we might be talking right now, but like, I miss you still, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, she was basically trying to say that she was saying she loved me when she said that. But then I was still coaxing it out of her. I was like, what do you mean? I don't know. Like, I was implying that the feeling was very mutual, okay? And long story short, I ended up milking it out of her. She was like, I love you. And I'm like, I love you too. And then boom, like that's how it works. I had her completely finished, okay? But the crazy thing is, remember, at this point, there was no talk of monogamy, okay? That wasn't a thing. Like, I think, again, we might have had conversations even being like, yeah, like, we're not monogamous, like, we're super chill, blah, 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 blah. And the thing is, again, that's why I was really into her, the fact that she was chill about me talking to other people. It was never an issue. Mind you, we wouldn't, like, discuss the people we were talking to with each other, but it was just something we just knew. Now, mind you, in hindsight, a lot of people tell me that they don't think she was talking to anybody else, but I wouldn't be so sure about that, okay? It's gonna come be apparent later, but I'm gonna tell you why people thought, like, she wasn't talking to anybody. She basically ended up quitting her job and implied that it was kind of for me. She basically gave some long explanation because she has like dreams of like doing other stuff. She's like, oh, you know, I'm just gonna stop going to the club, you know, I'm saving up enough money, and when it comes down to it, you know, if I ever need money again, the club's gonna be there, so I'm gonna stop going, and then I'm basically gonna look for a job somewhere else. And I was like, okay, cool, whatever. But yeah, something I want to say that I liked about her at this point in time was her maturity, okay? She seemed very mature. Well, mind you, again, she was like 27, so she better be mature. It was something I wasn't used to dealing with, okay? Because again, you know, in college, a lot of college age women had the same childish tendencies. I didn't really like it. Like, again, I saw like, you know, us being able to accept the fact that we weren't monogamous and we're both cool about it as very mature, very into it, okay? It felt like that's what I needed, right? But anyways, she quit her job, okay? And then something she told me after she quit her job is she was like, it was very important to me that I would be someone that deserves you. She said something along the lines of that. She's like, I want to be someone like who's like worthy of you. And I'm like, bro, I got her. Like, I really got her. But, you know, I'm playing the good guy. I'm like, yo, like, you know, like, I appreciate that, but I want you to, you know, I want you to do that for you. And she's like, oh, no, like, I also did it for me, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But anyways, the point is she quit her job, okay? And it's summer for me, no classes. So we are talking to each other at this point all day, every day, okay? And when I tell you, I could not recommend that less. Never do that. I used to never understand when people be like, oh, you know, being in a relationship can get in the way of like your development, like professionally, you know, like you might not be able to like work as hard because you're in a relationship. I never understood that until after this situation, because in this situation I was blind about it, because again, I did like really have strong feelings for her. I know I keep implying like, oh, you know, I was love bombing, and I was love bombing. I didn't love her, but I had very strong feelings towards her. Me and her straight up not getting anything done, okay, which was fine. Like, me, I was still getting like my TikToks out and everything, so that was completely fine. But like, we both could have been doing more with our lives at this point, and it was kind of like a loss that we were spending so much time just talking to each other. And also, one time we were on the phone and her friend was on the phone, and she basically wanted me to like watch them two like do stuff together, and I'm like, nah. Like, I feel like it's so hard dating bi women sometimes when their friends are on that type of time. Is there a lot of like weird dudes out there where it's like, ooh, my woman with another woman, But for me, there's no difference between that and seeing my woman like smash a dude. And it's like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to witness that. Now, mind you, again, this is not my girl. We're not monogamous, but I have enough feelings for her to the point where I don't want to see her sleep with someone else. Okay. Like, I would not like that. And again, keep that in mind. Mind you, there have been situations where I talk to someone in like the corn industry and like we're kind of like soft flirting. And then like I would like watch the videos because in my mind, I'm like, I'm up next. Like, I have no issue with that. Okay. But the thing is, if things were to progress past a certain point, like now, like again, with me and this girl in the story, we're saying like we love each other. I don't want to see that, Like again, we're not monogamous, so like if you do it, you do it, but I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to look at it. It's that kind of thing. The thing is with women specifically, okay, like when it comes to like bi women with women, some bi women don't consider doing things with women as like actually doing real things. Like as a matter of fact, some people probably have like straight girlfriends where they get some drinks in their system, start making out with their other women friends. I could not imagine on any earth being okay with that. Like, I remember one time this girl was telling me her body count, like, completely unprovoked, by the way. Like, I never asked that question. She basically told me she told me, like, a few guys. Like, it was not a very high number at all. And I kind of bullied her. I was like, like, that's such a low number. You're practically a virgin, blah, 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 blah. And then she's like, oh, but, like, if we include, like, my women body count, then it's actually this. And it was, like, a much higher number. And I'm like, what do you mean your women body count? And she was basically like, oh, it's different. Like if I did the things with the women that I did with men, it wouldn't be considered like a body, but like it's considered that because it's women and that's all we can do, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, nah, but like if you consider it a body, if you consider it a female body, then it's one of your bodies. Like that contributes to your body count. She was like, oh, like I didn't bring it up because like, it's not relevant to a man how much women I've slept with. And I'm like, first of all, it's not relevant to a man how much men you've slept with, unless obviously you caught something. How much women you've slept with is just as relevant as how much men you've slept with, okay? So if you're gonna give me like only half the equation, that's very untrustworthy of you. But then she was telling me that she also like tells women only like her woman body count. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, why? It's like you're hiding information from people. Anyways, my point in saying this is sometimes bi women think like they can kind of separate things they do with like men and things they do with women. So say they're dating a man, but they do specific things with women, it doesn't really count. Somehow, I don't know that logic, okay? And again, that's gonna come back later because some people would consider me weird or doing too much because I wouldn't want my woman getting involved with other women, and I'd consider that, being disloyal. But yeah, and something I need to tell you about us talking every day, it revealed a lot of things about this woman, okay? Remember, she called me Papa, right? So we would go to sleep on the phone, right? And sometimes I'd wake up first, and then she would wake up, and I saw how she woke up, okay? Now, I kid you not, she would wake up like this. Papa, Papa, calling for me, calling for Papa, okay? Like I'm her dad. Now mind you, I need you to understand. I did not feed at all into this Papa nonsense. I never said, hey, come to Papa, or like referred to myself as Papa in the third person. This was all her. What me and my friends called it was Papa mode, okay? She activated it all by herself. I will tell you there are certain situations, like if I get called daddy, and for one, I feel like I'm way too zesty for people to like call me daddy, Papa, stuff like that. I don't get it, but it happens to me so much, okay? If I get called daddy, I'm gonna feed into it a little bit, okay? Because a lot of times that's like strictly like, a bedroom athletics things. However, if I found out that they legitimately like call their dad like daddy to this day, then I'm like, whoa. Even feeding into the daddy thing, I feel a little bit weird. But like sometimes it's such a big fantasy. I'm like, I can accept this like in like favor of them. I'll do it for them, but like, it's not necessarily my thing. The fact that it gives them so much pleasure, it gives me pleasure, okay? But again, this Papa thing, which again, the thing about Papa is it's so exclusively like familial, okay? Like again, like daddy is like a very like common like you can go onto like one of those like adult sites and like you'll see like daddy stuff all that. But Papa, I had never heard anybody called Papa outside of legitimately being somebody in their family. But basically one day we got into this fight, okay? And I was like posting on TikTok or I was like commenting in TikTok comment sections or something like that. And I texted her, she was being super short with me. I was like, yo, like what's going on? And she was like, oh, like, I saw that you were active on TikTok, but you weren't texting me, blah, 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 blah. Mind you, again, this is not my girlfriend. So I'm like, why is she on this timing? But, I'm like, I'm not tripping. I'm like, oh, like, I'm sorry. Because, again, remember, I really do like her. So I'm like, oh, like, I'm sorry. I'll make sure I don't do it again. It definitely wasn't on purpose, yada, 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 yada. We work it out. Then the next day, okay, we're talking about bedroom athletics, all right? We're talking about the concept of making the first move physically. And I talk about how I don't like making the first move physically because, I worry, like, I'm such a large man. What if I'm in a situation where, like, this woman, she feels like she can't say no. Like, she worries about, like, I'm going to do something, yada, yada, yada. So I'd much prefer the woman to make the move, and then I can, like, go from there. She basically, a lot of women are on this type of timing. It's so weird. She's like, oh, but, like, I need the man to make the first move. Like, I can't, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, well, I guess we can kind of just, like, chill. until you're comfortable with that, you know? But she didn't like that at all. And she's like, oh, like if you don't make the first move, like I think that you thought I was ugly. And I'd be like, that's not at all what it would be. Like, I'm just like not into making the first move. And then she got so mad after that. Literally starts yelling at me. She's so mad. And mind you, at this point, I go completely submissive. Okay, I completely fold. I'm like, oh, like, you know, I'm so sorry, yada, yada, yada. And then I'm like, oh, like I didn't mean, because she was like, oh, like, you know, I told you, like, if you did that, it would make me feel like I was ugly and you didn't care. And I was like, that's not what I was saying, though, like blah 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 blah. And then basically she kind of like took the argument to a place where it was like completely on its head. I don't know, but she was like, oh, like you're supposed to baby me in times like this, and like you didn't do that. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what? Like, what is she talking about? But out loud, I'm apologizing, you know, because I don't want to lose her. I'm like, yo, I'm sorry, I'll be better. It's just, again, it's an anxious thing I have, like about like making the first move. And then she told me something crazy. She was like, oh, like, you know, you have to love yourself more, like, you know, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, that is insane. Like in the context of the conversation, like at the time I was just apologizing, but like thinking back on it, I'm like, why would you say that? Because she basically told me this other story where this guy had, she like ghosted him or something, or they had stopped talking. Like she told him, she's like, oh, like I'm not in a place to like be like a good, like, you know, girlfriend or significant other to you. And then basically she told him to like level up, kind of. And then he leveled up, and then he came back to her months later. He's like, yo, I leveled up. And then she was like, oh, like you came back, like you should love yourself more, which is, again, it's some heinous stuff to pull. She told me that story like a few days before telling me to love myself more. So I'm like, bro, she is low-key like manipulating me. Like she's low-key getting it done. Because now I'm thinking, I'm like, bro, there's no way she put me on the same level as that guy, right? But then the way I get her to stop being mad is I tell her, and here's the thing, I shouldn't have told her this in that context, but I told her, I was like, look, you know, sometimes I can't read like the room, I don't understand certain vibes because I have autism. And when I tell you, she started bawling her eyes out. She's like, no, Bryce, you can't do this to me. I didn't know, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, look, I know you didn't know. It's fine. But she's crying, and she's like, oh, like if I would have known, like blah, 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 blah. And she's like apologizing. She said, I feel so bad for being mean to you now, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, she's literally talking to me like I'm like, yeah, I can't say that. Like I'm an R slur. You know what I mean? I don't mean that as like a slur. Like I mean that as like the literal like definition. Like she thought I was like mentally challenged just because I said I had autism. Okay, but then I had to hammer home the point. I was like, look, I'm still like, you don't have to like baby me because I have autism. She was like, oh yeah, like I know. Like if you do something messed up, I'm still gonna get mad at you. But like just like certain things, blah 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 blah. Anyways, after I told her I had autism, there was like a certain genre of fights that we didn't have anymore. And something I forgot to mention, I told you I was going to come back later. Me and her had a conversation where she was pretty much making sure I didn't have like an Asian like a thing for Asian women, because it came up in conversation one time. Because I used to talk to this girl. I don't know if I'm going to make a long story about her one day, but basically, this young lady, she was Korean, right? And one day she asked me, she was like, oh, like, do you think I look Korean? And I was like, mind you, this girl, full blood Korean. So I'm like, yeah, you do look Korean. She started crying, okay, because she wanted to look white. She literally Googled pictures, like she Googled like Korean girl, right? And she's like, well, look, they're so ugly. I don't look like this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what's wrong with you? I thought she was a very pretty girl. I thought she had nice like Korean features. So I'm like, what are we talking about? But anyways, I told this girl that story, right? She wanted to make sure I didn't have an Asian thing because she had talked to guys before who had an Asian thing. She had some crazy stuff happen to her, like basically like dudes coming up to her, like instantly trying to talk about anime when that's not even like the region of Asia she's from. Dude saying crazy stuff in the bedroom, like, yo, like, give me that Asian, you know, give me that Asian body, basically, which is insane thing to say. And also, there's this one guy she was talking to where they went to a stand-up club together. And when she walked in a little bit late, and she went to sit next to bro, and everyone knew she was going to bro, okay? And the stand-up comedian up there was like, oh, you're with bro, like, I know you are. He always keeps an Asian thing with him. Crazy, right? Imagine just being relegated to like Asian thing. It's not like a specific like race thing, like pretty much just women of color I'm into. Now, mind you, there'd be points where I'd go through like certain phases where I'm like, oh, like this is the kind of woman I'm into right now. But it wouldn't be like a big like thing, right? Like there's never been like a lifelong like obsession with any particular race. Like I've always found them all attractive, and each have given them, you know, their fair chances. But then I ask her, okay, and she's basically like, oh yeah, you know, pretty much, you know, what I grew up around was like black guys and Mexican guys, so just like those two. And my thing is, here's the thing. Is she a chocolate chaser? Technically not, because she dates Mexican guys. But also, I always find it very weird when someone doesn't date their own race. Okay, now mind you, the thing is, I feel like a lot of like Asian guys in particular kind of get the short end of the stick. Like I know a lot of Asian women who don't date Asian guys. But the thing is, so it's like I'm more understanding of that just because it's such a common thing. But at the same time, it's always sketchy to me, especially if you don't date white guys. Because I'm like, okay, so you refuse to date white guys, refuse to date Asian guys, but you date Mexican and black guys. what kind of guy is it that you're into? Like, what lifestyle is it that you see when you're with a black man? And the thing is, obviously, I don't know all her exes, so I can't speak on them. However, before me, she dated a Crip. Okay, and she told me about it. She said it was very scary sleeping next to him because she was like, oh my gosh, he kind of, unalived a bunch of people. I'm sorry for saying unalive. Again, I don't know what I can say and what I can't say on YouTube. But basically, I remember she told me that this guy was basically gay, which is funny because remember, her husband also like sleeping with men. She said basically this dude's friend would like stay over every once in a while and like he would like sleep in the living room, and then her man at the time would get out of bed and then go hang with bro like in the living room for like however long and then like come back. He seemed to very much imply that like they were doing like freaky stuff when that happened, but honestly now that I think about it, they could have just been smoking. Now that I think. However, I will say she did mention like they would like have like their feet on each other, like feet on the lap, like they were like very close. Okay, and I don't know if this is the same story, but she told me like there was this guy where every time they would sleep together, he would FaceTime his friend and be like, yo bro, you gotta hit this with me, and then they would basically come in and they would have a threesome. I don't know if it was the same guy, but like I could see that. Now that is like I feel like that's overtly like you're attracted to men. Like, I don't care how good it is. I've never been at the point where I'm like, dude, I need to call my friend right now and he needs to come take his meat out and get some of this. Like I've never had that occur. Like that thought has never crossed my mind, not even once. Like imagine you're sleeping with a young lady and you're like, man, you know who would appreciate this? My best friend. Yeah, anyway, she was with that Crip who was kind of like a little bit gay or like bi or something. But yeah, shout out to Crips. Respect them. I'm not affiliated in any way, but just respect y'all. I'm trying to move to LA soon. I'm praying that clip doesn't come back to haunt me. Could you imagine? Like imagine someone pulls up on me. They're like, oh, what'd you say in this video? And I'm like, oh man, like I don't know what I would do. Because like when they like make you do like embarrassing things, or like you see people who are made to do embarrassing things like because of like gangs or whatever. I don't think I could do that. Not in the sense where I'm tough. I just don't have enough of a will to live. You know what I mean? But anyways, she clearly has like, it seems to be a weird thing for black and Mexican guys. So I'm like, it's weird that you would be worried about me having an Asian thing when you're very clearly a chocolate chaser, okay? With some, with some Mexican stuff on the side, like that's what you're into. But anyways, at this point in the relationship, again, not monogamous, but we've talked about getting married, having kids. We see a future together, okay? But we're like, right now monogamy is just not the move. And I'm like, okay, fine. Because again, I like talking to multiple people. So I'm like, I'm going to continue to do that. Even though I am kind of like locking in on her at this point. Like she's very clearly number one, like far and away. But I like having options. Especially with my image at the time on the internet. I was very much like, oh, roster, like here's how you like talk to people, blah, 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 building, expanding your roster, whatever. So it was very much helpful that I was able to talk to multiple people at once. I never would have been able to lock in monogamously at that moment, but it wasn't in the cards. However, you might be confused by this because again, remember, she quit her job and she was like, oh, I want to be someone who's like worthy of being with you, blah, 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 blah. All this talk. But like she's like, oh, like we're not going to commit to each other. And again, I'm completely fine with this. But like what I didn't pick up is because of my commitment issues and me not wanting to commit, I didn't notice that she had very odd commitment issues, even though like she low-key wanted to commit. But I'll tell you, from this point in the story, I went out sad, like very sad about 2 times. Okay, I'm gonna tell you about them. Basically, long story short, she said she knew someone who like invited her onto this podcast, right? She's excited because she's using it as an opportunity to network, put herself out there, because again, she does have aspirations, like she has stuff she wants to do. Mind you, I don't think it's stuff that you need to go on a podcast to network for, but again, like networking is networking. I'm gonna tell you this right now. As I describe the podcast, I don't know if there's any overlap between my viewers and people who watch this podcast, but if you figure out what the podcast is, I'm begging you, do not comment it. Or if you find out who she is through the podcast, please do not comment her name. I will literally delete your comment like as soon as I see it. I'm gonna be very blunt with you with why I don't want that to happen. For one, I don't want anybody to message her and be like, oh, like, do you see so-and-so made a video about you? Because I don't want to open that can of worms. Like if she finds out about this and finds out about it, it's whatever, okay? It's the nature of the beast. However, I do not want people to DM her and be like, oh, is this about you? Yada, yada, yada. And the second reason is, I'm a little embarrassed, okay? And my embarrassment is going to become a lot more clear when it comes to the podcast stuff. But I will just say, when I met her, she looked much different than she started to look throughout the relationship. Because mind you, she was an exotic dancer. That's a bit of a workout, okay? Especially, you're working, you're doing like 4 or 5 days a week, however much. You're working out. Don't take this the wrong way, okay? Because trust me, I was still in there. I was still like, oh, like, we're going to get married. We're going to have kids, blah, 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 blah. I was very much on that type of timing. But I'm just saying, if I would have met her in like the timing of like our middle of the relationship, like that's how she was looking, I don't know if we would have gotten as far as we did. And the thing is, I wouldn't tell you this because again, like women of all bodies deserve to be loved. But there's just a couple funny stories regarding like her weight that like I have to tell you. Yeah, but also I need to tell you, she never got that big. Okay, there was just kind of some moments where I was like, oh, because mind you, she was super short. Okay, so weight got put on really fast. It's like a little pudge. Okay, stuff that like a lot of people wouldn't notice or care about, but me, you gotta understand. I have my own like body dysmorphia problems. So me, I try to stay as skinny as possible. So I'm gonna notice stuff like that. So you might be imagining her right now as bigger than she was. Now, mind you, not that that would be a problem if she was bigger. Okay, I've been with big women before. It's happened. I gotta tell you these couple stories. Okay, so basically, one time she told me that like, oh, you know, she's going to the gym, but like she's not doing cardio because she doesn't want to be like underweight. And the thing is, she told me like she was going to the gym initially because she wanted to get in shape. And I'm like it was very clear that she wasn't doing cardio because she didn't like, a lot of people don't have like the patience to do cardio. A lot of people don't like doing cardio. It seemed like that was more the thing. She would like volunteer the information like, oh, you know, it's actually better for you like to not do cardio. So I just get in there and like I actually like, you know, just like lift, like blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, like lifting does increase your metabolism. Like that's true. But at the same time, it's like, get some cardio in. Mind you, there's nothing wrong with her body. I did not care at the time, okay? But it's like I could tell she kind of cared, so she would like make excuses to me when like she had no reason to. Like if she just told me like, oh, like, you know, I kind of like how I'm built right now, like I don't need to like lose anything, I'd be like, okay, fine, whatever. Again, I wouldn't care. But it's like the fact that like she would kind of like volunteer excuses like that, like, oh yeah, you know, I'm not doing cardio, yada yada. And then one time she was talking about her weight and she was like, oh, like, I'm a woman, like I'm supposed to have a fupa. And I was like, that was almost the last straw for me, because I'm like, here's the thing, it's one thing for you to, you know, get a little bigger, it's okay, it's whatever, you know, body weight fluctuates, you know, sometimes I'm a little bigger, sometimes I'm a little skinnier, it happens, okay? But don't you ever say a word like fupa to my face and expect me to take you seriously. So I'm like, oh, like what's a fupa, okay? Because I need her to like explain this to me in adult words, because I hate the word fupa. I can't handle it, okay? And she's like, oh, basically it's like, you know, where your uterus like is like coming, like it just goes out a little bit. And I'm like, should I, I'm considering should I say, but basically that's not what that was. If that's what a fupa was, she did not have a fupa, and it's whatever. Again, I was in there, I was in that situation, I was in it to win it. At that point, I did want to end up with her. Again, we weren't monogamous though. But again, I'm saying all this to say, if you somehow like, you know, reverse engineer, find out what podcast I'm talking about, and then you find out who I'm talking about, I need you to understand that's not what I saw when I entered this situation, okay? That's not what I saw before I actually got invested in the situation. The thing is, I'm a very vain, very shallow person, but like when it comes to things like that, not really, okay? Like if my girl were to gain weight right now, I wouldn't be going anywhere because my feelings are so strong. Like it doesn't matter to me at this point. Again, now that I'm removed from the situation, I'm just a little bit embarrassed, okay? So like, on the off chance, I know it's very rare. Like, if you somehow find out who this is about, I want you to understand, that's not what I saw when I entered. Anyways, the podcast, like she went on it, like they like talked about like just the hot topic that was happening during that time period. And then, you know, she got back, she's like, oh, like I think it went really well, blah, 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 blah. And she wanted to like watch it back with me. I'm like, okay, like that's cool. She's watching it, she's like super happy, like see herself on the podcast, it's whatever. Like, you know, it's a little like cute moment. But the thing is, the way she was talking on that podcast, remember, I told you at the very beginning, she was kind of like giving a little bit of like black scent vibes. But then, like, the more we talked, the more she kind of just, like, got into normal speech. On the podcast, giving big, massive black scent, okay? And I had to question her about it. I was like, yo, like, that's not how you talk. And she's like, oh, you know, it's how I talk, you know, when I'm around certain people, blah, 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 because that's how I grew up, blah, 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 blah. But I'm like, how come with me, like, you talk normally? Because, again, I'm like, you have the ability to talk normally. I feel like it's probably problematic to say not using AAV is talking normally, but I'm sorry, I'm gonna say that. So I'm like, you have the ability to like talk normally, but like you're choosing not to around these certain people. I find that very odd, okay? Specifically because she's a non-black person, code switching into what's considered a black scent, okay? That leaves a very bad taste in my mouth. But again, okay, I wasn't going anywhere. Like she could have done anything, and you will see later in the story, she did some crazy stuff and I stayed throughout it. Because mind you, I forgot to tell you why I'm so like into it at this time. Remember, I'm staying at my mom's place, and my mom at the time, she lived in Florida. I didn't know anybody in Florida. And also, the thing was, it's not like I could get on dating apps and like really like link up with people, because my mom's not gonna let me leave the house like that. She can be like, oh, like where are you going, blah, blah, blah. It's not the same as like my freedom like when I'm at college. So basically, me talking to this girl is like kind of all I have to do. And it's like, I like it, but you know, I don't really have anybody else at this point to distract me, like physically, you know what I mean? So it's like when I'm talking to her and we're just like talking, there's no one really competing with her on the level of like us talking. Cause again, we got along very well, we bonded. But in the beginning, I had a lot of like physical involvements with people that like kept me and this girl apart. But now they're all gone. So it's just us talking all day, every day, as much as we can, remember? And here's the thing. So we were watching podcasts together. And the thing is, I have a problem. A lot of times, like throughout my life, I could not deal with like hearing recordings of my love interests talking. You know why? Because for some reason, what's crazy is I value a lot of things. Okay, I value ambition, I value intelligence, etc., etc. But I would find myself in so many situations where I was with someone who had neither. The thing is, this girl, she was intelligent. Okay, like she wasn't like. Okay, I'm trying to think. There were situations later on where it's like, oh, you're kind of like not smart. But the thing is, like generally, she seemed like you're smart enough to talk to me the way I talk to you, like this, right? But now you're on this podcast using AAVE, and it seems like she sounds like a fish out of water. Like now that I've heard her talk normally, her black accent seems very obvious and forced. Okay, and again, I've heard her talk to her family before. She talks to her family the way she talks to me. So I'm like, again, you're claiming like, and I swear anybody with a black accent always claims like, oh, like this is my actual voice. No, it's not. Like, what do you mean? Like you code switch to talk normally with me? Like that's like what? Again, it's not like a job interview. I'm not your employer. Like you're not gonna like not get a job because you're talking to me a certain way. It makes no sense and it irritates me to this day. Anyways, I was very irritated watching the podcast, but apparently it went well for her and she got invited back again. Now I will tell you, this is one of the times I went outside. Something about this podcast, and this is why I'm afraid of people being able to identify it. Like, it's not just any podcast. On this podcast, when they invite women on, oftentimes those women are things like exotic dancers, they have an OF, and they get on there and they like shake it. You know what I mean? Like, they shake their, cake, they show the world. It's whatever, right? But mind you, this isn't my girl, okay? I'm not tripping. And from what I had seen on the podcast thus far, like I think I saw her shake it on the podcast before. It was just like, like on air, essentially, right? But one day she does the podcast, okay? She comes home, she calls me, she's talking to me about it, and she tells me, she's like, oh, they had me shake it on this guy, and like he wasn't catching it right. Like he was being so like soft and gentle. And, everyone was like laughing. So then like this other guy basically had to like show him like how it was done. Mind you, again, as I've emphasized up to this point, me and her, not in a monogamous relationship, again, very much on the board to talk to other people, sleep with other people, whatever, it's fine. However, do you think I want to hear that she was shaking it on another man? Nah. So in that moment, I'm like, I don't want to hear things like that. And mind you, hearing that, I'm a little upset. Now, when I get upset, I'm not someone who's going to scream. I'm not going to yell. I kind of just be quiet, okay? I have like a little attitude, right? And then she's like, oh, like, why is the energy like so weird, blah, 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 blah. And I explained to her that's why. And she gets angry at me. She's like, oh, like, now's not the time. Like, I've been drinking. Like, I've had certain stuff in my system. She did like some substances. I'm thinking the next day, like, she's going to calm down and be like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Like, my bad, whatever. And I wouldn't have tripped. But the next day, she was mad at me for getting upset in the moment when she told me that. And I'm like, the thing is, that's simply not what I want to hear. And I don't think you would want to hear something like that about me either. The thing is, again, I hammered home the point. Me and her, not monogamous, all right? But we also did talk to each other and we kind of like implied the fact that we were absolutely like not really like interested in other people anymore. Like we were kind of like just talking to each other, even though like there was not like monogamy wasn't what we were doing, but we were kind of doing it. We didn't agree to it. We didn't make any sort of promise, but like that's what we were doing. Like just like coincidentally, we didn't want to talk to anybody else. I'm telling her, I'm like, look, you can do what you want, but like I don't want to hear about you shaking it on some guy, him not catching it well enough, and then some other guy catching him and showing it how it's done. You know what? Like what kind of man would I be wanting to hear that? Especially like, oh, like she'll refer to me as her husband. Like we're very much like, oh, like, we're going to get married, blah, blah, blah. We're both on that type of timing, right? Which I will acknowledge is a crazy type of timing to be on when you're in a non-monogamous relationship, when you're planning on eventually being in a monogamous relationship. Bad idea, okay, on both of our parts. But again, basically, I'm telling her, I'm like, yo, you shouldn't have brought it up. And she's still mad at me for being like upset with her. And then she said some crazy stuff to me. She's like, oh, like we're not monogamous, and like unless I'm in a situation where like I'm told that like I can't do something because like you're my man, then I'm just gonna keep doing it. And she's like, and now I know like since you can't tell me because you're not my man, that like I'm just gonna keep doing it. Like I have to do it more. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I'm like, obviously now's not the time to like I would hate for this to be the event that propels us into being in a monogamous situation. She's like, yeah, like that, like can't happen at this point in time. So we're on the same page about that. But then she's just saying all that stuff like, oh, like now, like I feel like I have to do it again. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, look, you can do what you want to do, but just don't tell me that, okay? And she accepts that. But then it gets to a point where I remember she was still mad at me about like being upset. So then I have to apologize for being upset, okay? That's me going outside. That's the first time I go outside. When I tell you, it gets so much worse. Oh yeah, but an important moment we had in that discussion, she was like, oh, like, you know, what's the difference between like what I just did and the fact like I used to like dance. Like you said you're okay like with me dancing. I was like, okay, the thing was before when you were dancing, that was straight up for money, okay? Like you would be doing it and they would be giving you money. Like that's how it happened. You went on this podcast for free, shook it for free, shook it on this guy for free. I don't want to hear about you shaking it on some man for free. She understood, right? And then of course she understood that like, you know, her shaking it and then her shaking it on like some dudes, like that's completely different thing. And she very much implied that she was going to try to stick to just like doing it on air from this point on. But I remember when she was gaslighting me, she told me, she's like, oh, like, you know, we never talk about like, you know, doing stuff in the bedroom. So like I figured you wouldn't even get jealous because like you don't even talk to me like that. I didn't even think you viewed me that way, blah, 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 blah. And again, crazy gaslight job. Like just because I don't talk about sleeping with you, like all of a sudden, like now I want to hear about you getting it, you like, you know, what you're doing. And I told her, I was like, yo, like we talked about this before. I'm not super comfortable being very forward about these sorts of things. And also, you know, I don't want you to think that's all I want from you, yada, yada, yada. But then I asked, I was like, oh, like, so is this like why you did it? Because like we never talked about things in that way. And she like was like, yeah, like that's why. And I'm like, that's a crazy gaslight job. At the time, I completely fell for it, okay? But now looking back, I'm like, I cannot believe like I let her get away with that. Then, you know, that argument, that got us to start talking about that sort of stuff, right? So then we start, you know, talking in freaky ways. And when we talk freaky, she calls me this name, all right? Now this name, to me, I thought it was more of a pet name, okay? Like it sounded like it was a pet name. Now, this name is going to come up later. I can't tell you what the name is, and for later, it's going to be obvious why I couldn't tell you. Anyways, we're talking freaky. She's calling me this name. I'm letting it rock, okay? Keep this in mind. And also, she told me that she wanted me to start watching the podcast because she wanted me to support her, yada, yada, yada. I had no problem with that. I was like, okay, fine, I'll start watching the podcast. I watched it a few times, I think like 2 episodes. And, you know, she was throwing it on air. You know, it was cool. I had no problems. And, like, we had talked about that before. Again, yada, yada, yada. I need to stop yada yadaing. But basically, talked about it before, everything was fine. One fateful day, okay, and this is the most embarrassing thing that happened to me in my adult life when it comes to dating, okay. Basically, she's on the podcast, her friend is there. They're talking about sleeping together, okay. This is a woman friend, remember, this woman's bi, right? And she can text like while she's on the podcast, obviously. She texts me, she's like, oh, like we're lying, we're making this up, like we've never done anything, blah, blah, blah. And me, I don't believe her, okay? And I still don't believe her to this day. But I was just like, okay, fine, whatever. And then there's this part of the podcast where they like covered up the screen. And it was supposed to be like implied that she and that girl were getting like freaky. I think she was like I don't know what I can say on here. Her mouth was right here on the woman, okay? That's very much what was implied. And like they showed like little like snippets of it that very much looked like what that was happening. And then she texted me like she was like, oh, like we didn't do anything, like we were just like messing around, like nothing happened, like when they covered up the camera, blah 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 blah. And again, I think I did believe that at the time. I don't know what's wrong with me. But again, though, the thing is, I didn't think she did that. But if she did, low key, nothing wrong because we weren't monogamous. But again, at this point, we were very much treating each other, and I don't know if you could tell, with monogamous energy, right? Because if I were to bring up like talking to someone else, or like she would see certain TikToks and she'd get like a little upset. So it was like, we weren't monogamous, but we very much had certain expectations of each other that we did not communicate about nearly enough. And that led to a lot of issues, especially from her perspective with a lot of these situations. It's like, oh, you're my man, you're my man, you're my man. But then something pops up and it's like, oh, well, we're not monogamous. So that happened on podcast. I remember after she was even like, oh, like I can get that girl, like she'll confirm like, you know, that we never did anything, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, look, I don't want to be that kind of guy. I don't want to be in that kind of relationship where it's like, you have to get people to like, tell me something didn't happen. I'm like, I don't care. Like, obviously I'm a bit like, perturbed, but like don't bring other people into it. But that podcast was not the worst podcast, okay? I remember this day specifically. She was like, oh, like, are you gonna watch today? Like, please, please, please. I'm like, oh yeah, of course, I got you. I watched the podcast, and basically gets to a point where she's shaking it, and then they gesture for her to shake it on this dude. She shakes it on him. I'm like, oh man, this sucks. And as she's shaking it on this dude, this other guy walks in, gets behind her, and starts going to, like, obviously their clothes are on, but he's like dry, like, can I say it on here? I don't know. He's thrusting into her, basically. So I'm watching that, and I'm like, oh man. And remember what I was talking about earlier, okay? When I'm in situations with somebody and I'm doing exactly what they're doing or more, I have no issue. But the fact that I was staying with my mom, actually, I think I might have been visiting my dad at the time, but point is, I was staying with family. I hadn't done anything like physical with anybody else in months at that point, and I saw this, I couldn't handle it. Like if I was on campus during that time period, for one, I probably wouldn't have been watching the podcast. We probably wouldn't have got that far in the relationship where it was like at the point where it was. But if I did see that and I was on campus and I was still like doing my thing, I'm sleeping with people, I probably wouldn't have cared. But the fact that in this moment I wasn't doing anything, oh, it broke me. So anyways, she gets off the podcast. I don't know, I don't think, she didn't seem to know that I was going to be upset, but like she might haven't just been playing coy. But basically, I'm telling her, I'm like, yo, like, we had this conversation before and you told me to watch, so you knew I was watching and this happened. I'm a bit put off by it. And mind you, again, she's like, oh, I've been drinking, I have stuff in my system, I'm not going to have this conversation right now. So I have to wrestle with all these thoughts, all this processing of the situation by myself. And the thing is, I'm so down bad for this woman. The conclusion I come to is that I have to apologize. Like, oh, I shouldn't be mad because blah, blah, blah. We're not in a relationship, blah, 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 blah. You know, I'm sorry for, again, she was the one calling me her husband, saying we're gonna get married, yada yada yada, stuff like that, blah blah blah. And mind you, of course, I was reciprocating the energy, but it's like she was on that timing too. But I'm apologizing. I'm like, yo, like I shouldn't be like pushing things too far, knowing like we're not in a monogamous situation, yada yada. I think I sent her like a 10-minute voice memo apologizing. She wasn't even that fine. It hurts me to this day. Obviously, I'm over what happened, but the fact that I responded so like weak and that I was like apologizing in a situation I had nothing to apologize for. Again, she told me to watch the podcast, knew I was watching, and then like allowed all that stuff to take place. And mind you, she's shaking it on these men for free. The most she gets is a little bit of clout when at the end of the podcast they're like, oh, you know, follow these people on socials. And she didn't even get that much clout off it. Like I think she doesn't even have like more than 5K on IG right now. So it's like, bro, it's literally, the podcast is like bringing women on there to get exploited. Oh, and you know what's crazy? Me and her had a conversation where she was like, oh, like I'm glad like it's not one of those podcasts where they exploit women. And she's talking about like those red pill podcasts where they bring women on who are underqualified to talk about certain topics. So then the men like dunk on the women talking about those topics. And in my mind, I'm like, you're going on a podcast where they have you talk about, you know, particular topics and then shake your behind on camera. You don't think you're getting exploited? It's moments like that where I'm like, okay, like, yeah, like she's smart to an extent, but like what are we thinking about like right here? You're telling me these men are having you throw it back on camera and you don't think you're being exploited? Like, come on, let's be for real. Oh, but I will say, oh my gosh, some of the most embarrassing moments for me were the things that people commented towards her in this podcast comment section. And this is another reason why I can't have y'all say what the podcast is or like find out who this woman is, because when she walked in, I was looking at the live chat, right? They were like, it looks like it stank. Sometimes like she would be like shaking it and they'd be like, no, boo, boo. I'm not, I promise you, not everyone hated on her. Like there were people definitely glazing, but like, again, she walks in, they're like, oh, it looks like it stank. Is she pregnant? I'm like completely getting trashed. Okay. And that's another thing. I was like, bro, like there were moments I had where I was like, I don't think I could end up with this woman. Cause if someone, I could not date someone where I know like when she walks into a room, that's what people are thinking. Like, no way. Again, I was in there, okay? I was in it to win it. And yeah, that podcast moment was so, even though, again, nobody knew about it. Nobody knew like me and her were like talking or together in any way, of course, but it still felt embarrassing, right? Now I'm telling y'all about it. I don't know, it's been enough time. I don't really feel embarrassed about it anymore just because like that's not me. However, I do want to point something out. I feel like some people might hear that and be like, oh, villain origin story, this is why he's such a horrible guy, yada yada yada. When I tell you, before that, I was a worse guy. Like when I tell you, like everything that you would think is a villain origin story for me, I promise you it made me a better person. When I tell you, once I got out of this relationship, that's when it was much harder for me to say like toxic things and give toxic advice on the internet. It made me feel like so much empathy, okay? It was so annoying because I'm like, oh, now I understand why people are mad when I made videos about manipulation tactics, all right? Because I would try to do like the same, like, oh, like here's how you manipulate someone, and it would make me think of that relationship. And when it was so fresh, I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is making me like so mad. Like again, I see why people are hate commenting because I'm reminding them of their relationships where they got manipulated. So, but like I promise you, hand to God, okay, anytime I've been in a situation where like, you know, my feelings have been hurt by someone like I'm romantically involved with, you know, heartbroken, anything you want to say like that, it has made me a nicer person. I promise you. Like, I swear to God. So, like, there's no villain origin story, okay? If anything, I was born a villain and then, like, became more of a hero over time. Because the type of timing I was on, like, before I ever, like, got into any serious situations was crazy. Like, I talked about the other day, like, basically, you know, I was, like, sending pictures of like me in this other girl's room to this one girl, just absentmindedly. I wasn't even thinking about it. This girl was like, oh, you know, this girl, she took my last 2 boyfriends. And then like I followed that girl on IG. I was doing crazy things. I wasn't even thinking about it. Okay. But then when someone did like messed up stuff to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't like that at all. Let me be nice. However, I will say, once she did that, did I kind of like roll over and apologize? Absolutely. Okay. But I knew, I was waiting for the day. I was like, one day we're going to be in a monogamous relationship and I'm going to drag her through the mud. I'm going to match the energy once I have the opportunity. Because again, I was with family. I couldn't just go out and like sleep with a bunch of people. I couldn't do it, right? So I was like, once I'm given the opportunity, oh my gosh, she is getting completely dragged. At the same time, we're moving on. The relationship's looking really good until something happens. Okay, by the way, she gets a new job. I'm not going to tell you what her new job is because I don't want to give like her away. I want you to understand, I don't know if this is important to the story, but it might come back and play later. It's not like a real job though. Like it's a job where like you could see like a high schooler also working it. Like it's a job, but like, you know, it was crazy. She told me, she's like, oh yeah, you know, I definitely made more money when I was dancing, but like I'd rather do this, blah, blah, blah. And in my mind, I'm like, bro, like you were already dancing for however long. Cause mind you, she's 27 at this point. She wasn't dancing like her entire life, but I'm like, bro, like you, you might want to, if I was 27 and I was like dancing to make money, I was making good money and I needed money, I'm going to keep dancing. It's like, bro, if there's a day I don't want to make content anymore, but like, it's still making me good money, I'm gonna keep making the content, trust. So at this point, our relationship, not relationship, is going really well. Even though I have revenge on my mind. Here's the thing, I'm a very vengeful person, okay? Like if you wrong me even a little bit, like I'm gonna plan on something. Like, and I'm a very vengeful dater as well. Like that's why, like, you know, my ex, where I was like dating her and then like I basically like plotted like the breakup like months in advance and I posted a video about it. Yeah, like I'm a very like, you don't want to wrong me if you're in a relationship with me. Because the thing about me is I'm very good at making promises to myself, okay? So it's like, if I'm dating you and like you do something that like hurts me, I'm gonna be like, okay, like this hurts, I'm gonna remember it for later. Even if I forgive you from that point and I'm like moved on, whatever, I'm still gonna remember that there was a moment in time where I was like, you have to do something to get your get back, and I'm still gonna do it even if I'm no longer hurt about it in the moment. Like, isn't that crazy? I like that calculating part of me. I like that I'm like that. Anyways, everything's going fine, okay, until one fateful day, her stepdad passes away. Okay, he's no longer with us. Oh yeah, and I don't know if this is important to you, but none of her family knew who I was. Like they knew she was talking to someone. They were kind of like familiar with the concept of me, but like never met me at all. So her stepdad passed, right? And it was so funny. Remember, I'm so mad I didn't mention this earlier, but basically PDA, right? I told her how my mom said that like we would like look weird holding hands, and then like I'm like, like I'm not a hand holder, because me and her had talked before, like, oh, like we're not into PDA, we think that's gross, yada yada yada. But then when I brought up like I wouldn't hold hands, she was like, you consider that PDA? And I'm like, duh, like that's the most like that's like classic PDA. She's like, oh, but like I'd really want to hold hands, like I love holding hands, blah blah. And I'm like, no, not gonna happen. I'm not a hand holder. I refuse. Okay, so it's funny. The day that her stepdad passed away, she was like, I really hope that if you were here, you would hold my hand. And I was like, yeah, of course. But I thought that was like, how is that your like one of your first thoughts when your stepdad's passing away? Like that's is that like insane? Like I think that's a little insane. Anyways, when she's initially telling me that he passed away, she's crying. She's like, oh, like, you know, it's so sad. Like I'm worried about my mom, blah, blah, blah. You know, classic stuff. But then the crazy thing is she says to me, she says, I don't even care that he passed. Like I don't even like feel anything towards him. I'm just worried about my mom. And I'm like, okay. So when she says that she doesn't care that he passed, my mind tells my mind she doesn't care that he passed. You know, I feel like that's a very reasonable train of logic. But for some reason, sometimes when people say things like that, they don't mean it. This caused problems in our relationship. I'll explain. Basically, after he passed, she was like, oh, you know, I'm gonna have to look after my mom for a while, make sure she's okay. Of course, that makes sense, right? Actually, as a matter of fact, no, it doesn't make sense because your mom hits you. Why? Well, why support her, okay? You should let her flounder in a time like this. Let her go into complete misery, pits of despair. And what's funny is, it's kind of random, but at the funeral, she was on FaceTime with me the whole time. And like, she was like showing me like other people. And I'm like, what? Like, she was like, oh, like, here's so and so, and like she would like turn the phone. I'm like, what are you doing? Like you're at the funeral. Like you don't need to be on FaceTime with me here. I think she wanted me there for like moral support. Because again, we weren't monogamous, but I was pretty much her boyfriend and she was pretty much my girlfriend. Basically, again, she's with her family more, so we're not really talking as much. But when she's talking to me, she's being very like less affectionate, very noticeably, okay? Like she won't say she loves me. And I'm like, bro, what is this about? Like, what's going on? So it comes up and I'm like, yo, are we cool? And she's like, yeah, I'm just struggling with everything, yada yada. And in my mind, I don't think I say this at the time, but I'm like, I don't see how that like I don't see where you like stop saying you love me because like you're like stressed. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. And she's like, oh, I told you that I'm emotionally unavailable. I'm not an easy person to date, Bryce. And she said that like a couple times. And I'm like, why are you flaunting that you're difficult to be with? Like very weird. Okay, but then she said she was emotionally unavailable. And I'm like, nah, because she was always very affectionate early in the relationship. Okay, remember, she would go into Papa mode and she'd be like, oh, I love you, Papa. Saying it out loud sounds so weird, but she'd be like, oh, I love you, Papa, blah, blah, blah. I miss you, blah, blah, blah. Like, talk to me, blah, 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 blah. You're so handsome, blah, 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 blah. Again, a lot of like stuff, very affectionate, very like, like touchy feely with the words. And me, love language, words of affirmation, okay, it's a big one of mine. And this stopping was very alarming to me. But the thing is, I don't think, in any other situation, I'd be like, okay, there's a new guy in the picture. But like, I'm like, I know she's with her family more, okay? And like, she tells me when she's with her family. And like, her stepdad did indeed, like, justifiably just like passed away. So I'm like, I don't think she's bringing anyone new into the picture. But again, she could have been, I don't know. And people tell me that she didn't because like, oh, like, she quit her job because of you. Like, she was definitely like locked in on you. And then in my mind, I'm like, okay, but she was also like throwing it back on some podcast dude. So like, I don't know. So I forgot to say she was also in music videos throwing it back, okay? Which was like a thing where it's like, oh man, it's hard to watch. But also, that's not as bad because you have a task to complete. You know what I mean? I could see it as like, oh, like now you're kind of playing a role. When it was like, when she was shaking it on the podcast, I'm like, bro, you literally just throwing out some podcast bros. For no reason, for no money, for no capital. But in my mind, I'm like, bro, your stepdad passed. You said you didn't care. And now you're making it all about you. And oh, I got to spend time with my family, blah, blah, blah. What about me? Here's the thing. I feel like I should be more important than your family, okay? If we're romantically involved, your romantic interest, I believe, this is my personal belief, should be more important than your family, more important than your mom, your dad, any siblings. Unless you have kids, that love interest should be number one. That's just how it works. So when I'm number one, I'm like, bro, what's up with this? And also the thing is, again, someone passed in the family, you're sad. I feel like that's when you lean on a significant other, like, oh, I'm emotional, blah, blah, blah. But she pulled away, avoidant stuff. And also, this is very important. It's very hilarious. No, it's not important at all. But at the funeral, her mom got a text from her biological father, right? Her biological father, not really in the life, but they are in contact, I think. They hadn't talked for like years until like the stepdad passed away. It kind of prompted them to talk a lot more. But basically, biological dad texted the mom, bro, guess what this biological dad did? He sent the mom a picture of his meat. It is insane. Oh yeah, and also, more lore, the stepdad was cheating on the mom with another woman. And also, the stepdad, he was a bit older than the mom. He wanted to be buried with his first wife who had passed away. How insane is this? Poor woman, right? But not poor woman, right? Because she hit old girl. So I'm like, nah, I can't. If you're laying hands on like your children, I'm not gonna feel that sorry for you. But if she didn't, that would be crazy, right? But anyways, imagine you're mourning the loss of your partner and your ex sends you a picture of their privates. Is that not insane? That was hilarious to me. Okay, but anyways, when she was telling me this is when important information came out. Long story short, she said her dad's government name. Like it just came out. She's like, oh yeah, like my dad's name is blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what? Because remember when I told you that when we got freaky, she would call me a certain name? That was her dad's name. And she told me, she was like, oh, like you don't think that's weird, do you? And I said, oh yeah, no, of course not. The thing is, she said it to me in a way where I would have been the weird one to say that it was weird. You know what I mean? You know when people say things, they're like, you don't think that's weird, do you? Like you're not one of them, right? She didn't say you're not one of them, but that was the vibe. Like, oh, like, you don't think it's weird, do you? I know I just keep saying that, but like, you don't understand the weight, like the pressure she put on me to say that it wasn't weird. And mind you, you're probably like, oh, like, how do you let her get away with calling her dad's name? Like, it's not weird to you, blah, blah, blah. Here's the thing. I didn't know it was her dad's name. It sounded more like a pet name. Remember, this woman, her parents, was she born? Yeah, she was born in America. Her parents, not from America, okay? So I thought it was a little pet name. I'm like, okay, whatever, we're cool. She called me her dad's name. On top of all the papa, daddy, she told me your dad's name. Like, why would she do that? And then why would she tell me? Like, why would she tell me that? Why me? I have such a problem, bro. Like, sometimes, one time this girl called me dad. No, a couple times a girl called me like dad, like not daddy, like dad. Like, why? And she would wake up. Again, I showed you this earlier, but she would like, Papa, Papa. Like, she would be calling for me like that in the morning. Why? And the thing is, I promise you, I never come to women with those vibes. I come to them very feminine, like, oh, you're such a sweetie pie. Is that it? Is that like me calling them like, oh, you're so cute? Like, does that do it? No. No, because again, I'm super feminine with it. Like, again, like I'm a like there's no way like I give like true daddy vibes. The thing is I don't, but I think it's like them. But I'm like, how am I attracting them? You know what I mean? How am I attracting women who do this to me? I just don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, I'm gonna have to get back to the story eventually, but like, can you? And the thing is, I don't understand. Whenever I tell like people this, and at one time I told it on live and like people understood, but like when I told like in like short form content, people didn't understand. Like people are like, nah, like that. You don't. It absolutely. I swear to God. I swear on my life, on my mother's life, on everyone's, on anyone I've ever loved. Actually, important interjection here. If you know me, you know some lore. My mom has given me permission to lie on her life, so I don't want you to think I'm like, okay, so literally on my girl's life, on my sister's life, on my dad's life, on anybody in my family's life, on the grass outside, on your life watching. She said that. She called me her father's government name. And then had the nerve to be like, you don't think that's weird, do you? Obviously, I'm not going to tell you the dad's name because I don't give out names when I tell these stories. But when I tell you, I promise you, like, there no ifs, ands, or buts about it. What is on that man's ID is what she called me. Anyways, I have to move on with the story, okay? After her stepdad passed, we had this conversation. I was opening up to her because, mind you, I'm staying with my mom, right? Don't know anybody around. Very, like, lonely. Like, me and her are talking a lot less. I'm like, man, like, this. So I'm not feeling well, okay? I'm opening up. I'm like, yo, I'm having some, like, unaliving thoughts. And she told me that was very inconsiderate of me to say. And I'm like, excuse me? Now, when I tell you, at this point, I've had such a bad history of like telling women I'm dating, like, oh, I'm having unaliving thoughts and them reacting very poorly. Okay. She reacted poorly. She's like, oh, like, don't you think that's insensitive considering, my stepdad passed away? And I'm like, you told me you didn't care about that. You told me you didn't care that he passed. Like, what's going on here? And then we get into a fight and she's like, oh, like, of course I care. That was my stepdad, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, it's not my fault that you literally told me you did not care. And now all of a sudden you're backtracking. And mind you, I'll tell you, this thing like ruined her life. It actually, I don't know if it ruined her life. But basically, when me and her were first talking, she had a plan to like move out. Like, because again, she was staying with her family. She wanted to move out, live by herself. But then after this happened, she's like, this is kind of bringing me and my family all together. We're talking about like all just getting like one big house together. I'm like, what is wrong with you? Now, mind you, here's the thing. Culturally, and again, she's Asian. Like her parents, like straight up, like from the country she's from. A lot of times, it's normal for families to stay with each other that long, but like, bro, my American brain, I can't handle it. Like, I know sometimes things happen, things hit the fan, and you got to stay with like a parent because just to, survive, if that happens, of course, completely fine, life happens. But like, if you're in a situation where you're like, I can get out of here, or I'm working towards getting out of here and just being like, never mind, I'm just gonna stay with my family. I can't respect it. Because in my mind, if you're staying with your family, you can't grow in the ways that you need to grow, okay? Like, I remember I grew up in Michigan, and when I was going to college, I chose to go to college in Pennsylvania not because it was, like, there were a lot of reasons, but I needed to be far from home, okay? I needed to actually spread out my wings, not go home and see my mom every weekend like a lot of people did. Like, I'm not gonna lie. And if you're in college and you go visit your parents and your family like every weekend, you're pathetic. I'm sorry, I can't hold that in. But it's like, this is when you grow. This is when you become like an actual, like, adults, you know what I mean? And what's funny is I was very like, my mom was very like, when I was in high school, I was coddled like a little bit, like when it comes to like, certain things, like she would drive me to school every day, things like that, okay? But I knew that when I became an adult, I wanted to be an adult, okay? That's why I don't rely on my mom for anything. So when people, and specifically people I'm dating, are like, oh, I have to be close to my family, I have to be involved with my family, it's very disgusting. And again, there's situations where it makes sense to stay with your family, but her situation was not one of them. Because mind you, she's 27. Again, 27-year-old woman. And honestly, her being 27 is probably why I let Papa slide, because in my mind, I'm like, she can't be on this weird stuff. She's 27. She's 27. She's 6 to 7 years older than me. Like, there's no way. Like, this can't be weird. Like, it can't be this. I will say she would say and like repost like weird stuff. Like, there's this one post where it's like, oh, I'm in my late 20s, but I feel like if I got pregnant, it would be a teen pregnancy. And she's like, oh yeah, I get it. There's one post that was like, oh, like I'm just a 27-year-old teenage girl. I don't know if it said 27 specifically, but like that was like the point of the post. And I'm like, oh, okay, like please stop, please stop, please stop. This is when the I'm just a girl thing just started, and she was like really into it. But I'm like, at what point are you just a grown woman, you know? So again, she's talking about moving in with her family, like even like more of the family members. And then like she's not really talking to me that much because she's spending so much time with family. And the thing is, again, that would be a different thing if when she was talking to me, things were normal. Again, she's not even saying I love you. She's not calling me baby, anything like that. She's like being very like standoffish with me. And what's crazy is we build back up to it, right? Like she'd get into papa mode, but then we would get into a fight. I'm gonna give you one of the fights, okay? Basically, she went to see Les Mis with like her family or something, right? And she got to intermission. She was texting me. She's like, oh, like, I don't like it. And I think I made a joke. Oh, yeah. She's like, oh, like, it's not for me or something like that. And then I made a joke. I was like, oh, you know, we can't all be cultured. Because personally, I love musicals. You know what I mean? And then she responded like, oh, okay, LOL. And I'm like, no way she actually got mad about that. And again, I definitely went outside this time too. I'm like, no, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I know you're one of the most cultured people I know, blah, 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 blah. And she was not giving me anything. But then later on, she's like, oh, like, yeah, like, you know, I'm kind of on my period, so maybe that's why I'm being a bit weird. But then the thing is, after that, she was completely weird again, okay? Got completely out of papa mode, and it's just like speaking to me as if like I'm some dude she just met. But again, when she just met me, she was already in papa mode, being so much more affectionate than she was now. So that was very weird. Then it got to the point where I couldn't handle like these like weird like mixed signals anymore, okay? So I'm like, yo, like the us talking like about a future together, you know, us being together, like is that something like you still want or not? Because I'm getting a little bit of mixed signals. She sent me this long paragraph. She's like, yo, like, you know, and with everything going on, I just need space, blah 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 blah. And then I was like, oh, like, you know, can we just like talk on the phone like one last time to like talk this like out before I give you the space? And when I said talk it out, like I forgot it was a much longer message, so it made more sense. But I was basically saying like, oh, like just to like understand the nuances of the space, you know what I mean? Like, can I text you at all? Can I call you at all? Stuff like that. That's what I was trying to figure out. But she was like, no, like we can't call. And I'm like, what? I want you to think those earlier arguments we had where we solved them pretty fast because she was so open to communication, but now all of a sudden it was all out the window. I'm like, please, like, can we just talk on the phone? Yada, yada, yada. And she's like, no, like, it's not going to happen. And she said something, it was some BS, like, oh, like, you know, I'm putting myself first. I'm like, bro, like, you don't even have the nerve to, like, say, like, any of the stuff you're saying, like, to my face. Like, again, if we're having, like, an important conversation, we're supposed to be in a relationship. We're not in a, you know what I mean? Like, we're supposed to be, like, working towards certain things in, like, you're not going to talk to me on the phone about it? Kind of crazy, especially after making such a big decision, okay? So now we're going on a bit of a break, right? And we don't talk for a week, and then a week goes by, and I basically send her flowers. I'm like, oh, you know, just like wanted to let her know like I was thinking of her and thinking of her positively, even though we weren't talking. But when I tell you the days we weren't talking, I was so down bad. Like I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I was completely tripping. And again, if you, I pray you don't, but if you find out this woman I'm talking about and you see her, you'll be like, for real, Bryce? I'll say again, it's not my fault. She looked much different when we first met, okay? And again, this is why I'm talking about timing, okay? She caught me in a time where I was just about to be in a situation where I wasn't really going to be talking to anybody, right? I was going to be very lonely, and she was going to be like one of my only avenues of real communication. Because the thing is, I was always a texter and not a FaceTimer. Like, she was one of the first people I've ever like FaceTimed consistently, right? So us talking, us bonding, that's when we became like a kind of like a thing, you know? So I'm in this situation, I'm not really talking to anybody else because I don't even have anybody to talk to like as a friend at this point. So she's the only person I'm talking to. Obviously, I'm gonna grow like this sense of attachment. Oh, and also before this, she had gotten me flowers, okay? That's what gave me the idea to get her flowers. But anyways, gave her the flowers, and she texted me. She was like, oh, like, Bryce, like, for real? Like, kind of like laughy emoji vibe. And I'm like, is she like mad at me right now? But she wasn't. Like, she was like, oh, like, that's thoughtful, blah, blah, blah. She's like, oh, like, are you free to talk? You know, I've missed you. And I'm like, yeah, of course. So then we talk, and things are kind of like better than they were before, with her being standoffish, but like not at all like affectionate, like still. So then we're talking again a bit more consistently. And then a few days into it, I ask her where her head is at, right? And then she's like, oh, you know, I just feel like, I need to do more things for myself. Like, I'm not in the space of like approaching like any sort of like relationship with anybody or working towards anything with anybody. And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. So we're basically talking as friends at this point, right? But then again, it was the same cycle. She would start getting much more affectionate with me, saying like, oh, like, I love you. Oh yeah, no, she explained, she's like, oh, like the whole reason I didn't say I loved you is because, if I was said I love you, but I was being standoffish, like that would probably like mess with you, right? And the thing, what she had told me before, like in arguments, she was like, oh yeah, I would never like withhold and I love you because like that's abusive. But she literally ended up doing that, right? But yeah, she was basically saying she didn't say she loved me because she thought that would mess with me mentally. I'm like, you understand, you stopping out of nowhere and not telling me why is what messed with me mentally. Like, are you, again, not the sharpest tool in the shed, or just like full of garbage and being manipulative? This is near the end of summer, right? So we're supposed to essentially be just friends, but we have our moments of like flirting again, right? And then of course we're still talking on the phone a lot. Now I finally come back to campus. All right. I think it was, yeah, I got into this apartment specifically. At this point, I haven't done anything in months. So I start painting the town red. I get on these apps. I want to tell you, the first week, if you're ever in college, the first week of any semester, that's where you can go the craziest. When I got back, I think the first night I was chilling, but after that, I was on 10. Okay. I was always linking up. Again, I had Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, all activated. And the second I was no longer, constantly like texting her, waiting for her to call, always available when she wanted to talk. It was very clear that I had other stuff going on just in life in general. Like, I don't know if she knew I was sleeping with people or not. Guess who came back to the fray, acting all affectionate the way it was before? Classic push pull. Okay, I hate that it worked. Because I'm a big like hater of like, oh, you got to pretend to not like someone in order for them to like get involved with you and like be like serious about you. It worked, okay, but at this point she was not the most mature person. Ever since her stepdad passed, again, she was being super weird. But we were talking like normal again, okay, not as much. That we're talking more similarly to how it was when we first met. Because remember when we first met, she was very much the one pursuing me. She texted me first. She was like, oh, you want to call? She was always the one, like, she would call me like her man, like before like that was ever really a thing. She was very much the aggressor in that situation, okay? And then it became a point where we were both the aggressors, and then she pulled away, and then I was more the aggressor. But now we're back to where I like to be, okay? Like she's very much pursuing me again at this point. And then things got really funny, okay? Because I was posting these TikToks, right? I don't know why I did that. I'm tired. Like I did this already. Basically, I posted a TikTok where it was a young lady. It was about this young lady. She had like a big like chest area, right? And I was posting about like hooking up with her, stuff like that. And I saw that I think she liked it's very rare that I see when people like my TikToks, like specific people, but I saw she liked it, right? And she's being very weird with me. And then she said something. She's like, oh yeah, I just want to let you know, like I saw one of your TikToks and it just kind of made me feel like a bit weird. And I was like, oh, okay. She's like, yeah, I know we're not monogamous or anything, but like, I'm just letting you know, it made me feel like a bit like odd. And I was like, oh, okay. When I tell you, it felt so good, okay? Because she just for so long had been acting like she did not care about me whatsoever. Finally getting that thing of like jealousy, and also finally her understanding the fact, like, I see, I feel like me telling the story about hooking up with someone is not nearly as bad as what I had to see, like, as far as like her, like, getting thrusted upon by bro. I'm like, all right, she gets it. And then I make it, because the thing is, truly, she was probably like my best friend at this point, right? Because we were talking so much, and the feeling was mutual. I was hers. And I made this post where I was like, bro, like I have this girl, she's kind of like my best friend, but like I kind of have like to stop myself from talking about other women to her because like that's how close we are. And then she sent me, I don't know if she sent me that TikTok or just brought it up on the phone, but she was like, yeah, I thought that was funny because like me too. And it was a very performative me too. Very much came across as like, I don't want you to think you have anything over me, so I'm going to tell you that I'm talking to other people. But actually, now that I think about it, she had told me before that, like she kind of implied that she wasn't talking to anybody else. Because I remember even when she was going through it, she was like, oh yeah, usually like when I go through like, stuff like this, I kind of had a history of being like promiscuous, but I feel like I haven't done that this time. So like, I feel super good. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. I didn't process it at the time, but I don't know. I don't know if that's her trying to tell me she wasn't being involved with anybody else, or maybe she just wasn't involved with as many people as she thought she would be. So I don't know. I would just rather assume that she was talking to other people because then, I kind of feel like it justifies my entire story here. But again, basically, the complete dynamic has reversed. She's trying to play catch up now, right? But then I go to New York, and that's when things really start to hit the fan. I'm in New York visiting my guy best friend. Like, I know him from high school, okay, so we're closer. I'm in New York visiting bro, right? And the thing is, when we're in New York together, or when he's just an active guy, right? He's always doing things, right? So when I'm there with him, I'm also doing things, always busy, like never just like chilling. The thing is, me, when I'm by myself, I do a lot of chilling. That's why I had time to like talk to her all the time, stuff like that. But when I'm in New York, I have much less time to talk. She's always asking, like, oh, like, can we call now? Can we call now? And I'm like, oh, I'm doing this, doing this, doing this. I still make time for it though, so we still talk on occasion. However, like, she starts getting a little distant, and there was a point where me and her didn't talk for like 2 days. And the thing is, when I'm in New York, I'm still painting the town red, okay? So now I'm back to business as usual. Like, me and this girl's like, our pseudo relationship isn't really what it used to be. I'm like, okay, like, yeah, me and her are in this thing now, but I definitely don't see a future in it at this point. So after the 2 days, I spin back. I'm like, yo, we haven't talked in a minute, blah, blah, blah. And then we talk on the phone. And then she's like, oh, yeah, I just saw that, like, you were like doing things. And I just was like, okay, whenever he's not busy, like, contact me or whatever. And the thing is, she said it in a way that was kind of like a bit, there was some animosity there. And then I remember specifically after that, she was like, oh, like, I don't want you to think I was sad though. Like, I wasn't sad. And I was like, okay. Like, it was very clear that she did like miss the boy, and she was very insecure about the fact that like I didn't have that much time for her. And she started tripping, okay? There was this one day where basically I had to go to sleep, right? I didn't have to go to sleep. I was very tired. And I told her I was going to sleep. And she thought I was lying about going to sleep. So she's like, you know what? Actually, like, don't talk to me again, blah, 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 blah. She was on that type of timing. So then I called her, right? And I was like, no, like, it's not like that, yada, yada, yada. And it was crazy as this happened in front of my friends. So they're like, oh man, he must really like this girl. So it's, again, kind of embarrassing given everything that happened. Basically, I'm explaining to her, I was like, no, like, genuinely, it was a very long day. Like, I actually was going to go to sleep. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. But anyways, we get into a bunch of little spats like that when I'm in New York. And then we're talking one day, and then I'm like, yo, maybe we need like situationship counseling. And then she was like, no, like, don't say that word, blah, blah, blah. She's talking about situationship. She's like, that's the problem. She's kind of like laughing, like, when people are like laughing, like through like tears, like she very obviously wasn't crying, but like, when people laughing because they're like actually sad about something. So she kind of like implied that she actually did want to be in a relationship, but mind you, she was the one at every turn, wherever it got close, she was always like, oh, we're not monogamous though. And I was like, oh, okay. The thing is, back during the summer when I wasn't talking to anybody else, if she wanted to be monogamous, she would have had it, okay? But now when she's seeing what it looks like when I'm not giving my all, and when it's very obvious that like I'm talking to other people again, now she wants it. And we kept getting into these like little arguments where it was very much like implied that she was like, oh, she's like, yeah, she's like, I understand, like, if we were monogamous, like this wouldn't happen, but yada yada. Again, hinting that she wanted to be monogamous. But I'm like, nah, young lady, your ship has sailed. But I still do have very strong feelings for her at this point in time, okay? No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But you know what really was the beginning of the end? I was talking to my friends about the situation with her, right? And they basically told me she was tweaking, right? And I'm like, oh, I guess she is tweaking. Because the things, I thought I was the one in the wrong. They're like, oh, she's being really hot and cold with you. She's not really giving you like solid like answers without you asking. Because again, the thing is, when we were going through all that, when she was like, oh, like I need space, like blah, blah, blah. And then like I asked her like, yo, like, where are we at? I always had to ask in order to get like an update on how she felt about me. Like, she never just said it, she would just start acting different. So I'm like, okay. So that's why I start standing my ground in arguments a bit more. Oh my gosh, I completely forgot. I forgot the context of this argument, but I remember I told her something, right? I was like, oh, like, it seems, I said something like, oh, it feels like you're being like manipulative. Okay. Like, I was very much implying that she was like kind of like being a bit sinister, but I didn't say anything that was too crazy. But then I remember she was like, oh, I can't be with someone who doesn't view me the way that I view myself. And I'm like, that, now mind you, she was very much like, oh, you gotta heal and grow, blah blah blah. And I was like, that doesn't sound like it's good for growth. Like, I couldn't hold it in. Like, I had to say that. Like, what is she talking about? And let me tell you this, that's not the first or last time someone has come at me with like that sort of thing, where it's like, oh, I don't view myself that way, so like, what do you mean you don't view yourself like that? Like, I don't care. Like, I'm telling you about yourself. Like, when someone's telling you about yourself and you're like, no, that's not how I see myself, how does that matter? But basically, she said that. And then she would keep doing this thing where, like, she had been doing it, I don't know, maybe like a month? Like, just on and off, she'd be like, oh, like, I don't think we should be talking romantically if it's going to be like this. But then hours later, a day later, we start talking like normal again. So it's kind of like, it holds no weight. But I'm gonna tell you what really put the nail in the coffin for, which I knew the relationship had to end, when my friends told me that she wasn't that fine. They're like, bro, she does not look that good enough for you to be acting like this. I was like, let me tell you this. If someone tells me, Like someone like whose opinion like I definitely respect. They're like, oh yeah, like your girl isn't that fine. I can't. Okay, I can't deal with people thinking I'm with someone who's like chopped or mid. And the thing is, if it's like a stranger, it's one thing because it's like, oh man, that stranger could be like a milkman. They could just have a different type. And so because sometimes you see people they genuinely don't like attractive people. But the thing is like when I know like my friends, I know the women they go after, like they go after like women who I would deem like to be attractive in an objective way. For them to say I'm with something mid or chopped now, and remember, I told you, she kind of let herself go. In, bruh, I hope I'm not a horrible person for saying that, but she kind of let herself go. But again, I wasn't seeing it because I was so into it, right? I really wanted her that bad. Now I keep putting on this jacket and taking it off. It's because like it keeps getting like warm and then cold, and then warm and then cold. Anyways, that's when I realized I had to divest. Okay, because I was like, man, like people don't think she's that bad. Like again, she still looks good to me because I had those feelings for her. But like I'm like, man, like I can't go around walking around with someone like mid. But anyways, when I knew I like had to cut it off like soon, like when I'm in situations, I know when it's gonna end pretty soon. But there'll be like one fight where like I'm like after this fight, like literally the next thing, like I'm out. And I've told this story before, okay? And so I'm gonna try to make it quick. It was basically her birthday. Now, mind you, again, she's 27 years old. So I think she was turning 28 or she was turning 27. I don't know. In my mind, she's always been 27, right? Basically, she is old enough to be very normal about your birthday, okay? But she is like, ah, I love my birthday. I'm so excited. I love my birthday. Again, what should I expect from the girl who wakes up like, Papa, Papa? So, yeah. But the thing is, again, I have a very low tolerance for that kind of stuff. And I know the story makes it seem like I probably have a high tolerance for like women acting like babies, but I'm not. The birthday is too far. It's one thing to be excited for, like, oh, I can't wait, I can't wait. That disgusts me only a little bit, okay? But I'm just like, okay, I guess if you're just an excitable person, whatever, I don't care. But when people act out on their birthday, and then it's like, oh, but it's my birthday. Everyone has to follow my rules. That's when it's a problem, okay? And that's where the story comes in. Okay, so I'm in New York at the time, okay? Now, mind you, she's in LA. Basically, that night, I call her at 12 on the dot LA time. You know what I mean? Because I want to be the first to wish her a happy birthday. And then, I call her, I'm like, happy birthday. And I stay up until 7 a.m. New York time until she falls asleep. Okay, she falls asleep on the phone, and then afterwards, I fall asleep, right? Then I wake up in the middle of the day, I text her. My friend's like, yo, bro, you want to get lunch? I'm like, yeah, I go to get lunch with him. And she asked me to call. And I'm like, oh, I can't. I'm at lunch with my friend right now. Again, we're in like the dining hall, very public area. I hate being on my phone in super public areas like that. Like, I feel like that's a bit rude, you know what I mean? But is that, okay, little side note. I remember someone wanted me to call them while I was on the bus. And I want to know, like, if you agree that that would be like, creepy, you know what I mean? Like I'm like, bro, like I'm on a bus, a bunch of people are around, not creepy, but like a bunch of people are around. Like I feel like that's rude. Like I don't want to hear, because I've heard people like talk on the phone before, like on public transportation. I'm like, bro, like don't do that. Like, I've always thought that was rude. But anyways, point is, I'm not talking to her on the phone right now. I'm like, yeah, I'm at lunch. And then she's like, oh, like she starts getting like really weird with me. And she's like, oh, like I thought you would give me more attention, like considering that like it was my birthday. And I'm like, I literally stayed up until 7 a.m. talking to you. And then like she hits me with a passive aggressive, well, I guess you're not my boyfriend anyway, so blah, 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 blah. That's it happening again, okay? Her implying like, oh, like she wants me to be her boyfriend, so like we can like have like this like, connection and whatnot. Because mind you, at this point we had been talking for like a good long enough to like become in a relationship, you know what I mean, to go from talking stage to relationship. Like we were talking for months non-monogamously. So it became clear, and it becomes more clear the more I think about it now. At this point, she wanted to be in a relationship with me, but I feel like she didn't know how to approach it. Because again, before, anytime it came up, it's like, oh, we're not monogamous. Like we're not gonna be monogamous with each other. But again, we're fighting because she's like, oh, like, you should call me, it's my birthday, blah blah blah. And I'm like, I'm literally like at lunch right now. You know what I mean? I'm like, I could literally, and things I told her, I was like, oh, like, I'll try to make some time like when we get back to the crib. And that wasn't satisfying to her. So I'm like, what do you want me to do at this point? Again, there was that fight because I can't do a birthday panic attack from someone who's 27, like grow up. So I knew the very next thing that we got into, that was going to be the last thing we got into. I don't know if it was the next day or a few days later, me and my friend, we took some substances with some other people, right? And basically it was a crazy night. I woke up the next morning. I was talking to Shorty on the phone. I was talking about the night. I was like, oh man, like it was so crazy, yada, yada, yada. And she said something on this phone call that was really troubling to me. Okay. So basically, we were tripping, right? And the thing is, someone who was tripping with us kind of seemed to be having a bad trip. So we had to make sure they were okay. Like it was a big thing. So then I mentioned that to her and she was like, oh, you guys are better than me. One time I was having like a trip with somebody and then they were having a bad trip and I just left because I don't want them to like ruin my high. And I'm like, what? Like that's insane. And mind you, this woman, like she's big on like being like good person, empathy. I'm like, bro, that's kind of like crazy. Like the thing is, I'm genuinely a bad person, but the thing is, I know like someone having a bad trip, like personally, like knock on wood, I've never had a trip that I consider to be super bad. But like I know like the fragile state of like when you're tripping, if something bad were to happen or like if you were to have a bad trip, it's probably so horrifying. So the last thing I would want would be for that to happen to anybody. Like to be like you would have to be like seriously like my worst enemy. Like James Frank, like the How to Hate on Someone More Successful Than You video, James Franklin, I was talking about him. Yeah, like him I would wish a bad trip on. But like someone I just have a minor disagreement with, I could never. So let alone like my friend or a friend of a friend, I'm absolutely gonna try to support them. So it's crazy to me that she said that, but I just kind of glossed over it. And mind you, we're having this conversation. She's getting ready for work. Okay, it's very important. And then my friend comes into the room. I'm gonna give you like I promise. This is I think I remember this exactly for how it went. Okay, my friend came in the room. We start talking about like the trip a little bit. Now, mind you, here's the thing. Usually, when someone would walk into the room and start talking to me when I was on the phone with her, I would mute, okay? And she would never mute because she's like, oh, I want you to hear like my conversations, blah, blah, blah. And she would continuously ask me to not mute so she could hear my conversation. So this time, I did not mute, okay? And my friend said exactly like, oh man, last night was crazy. The trip was crazy, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh yeah, I know, right? That was insane. And then he was like, do you want to get breakfast in a second? And I was like, oh yeah, let me wrap up this phone call. So I go downstairs to wrap up the phone call with her. And I'm like, hey, like, you heard my conversation, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, yeah, that was an interesting choice. And I was like what? Like what's going on? She was very clearly upset. And I'm like, am I missing something? Like, what's going on here? She's like, yeah, like I'm a little bothered, but it's a bad time. Like, I gotta go to work like right now. And like, so yeah, that was like legit. I was like, okay, yeah, see you later. I'm sorry. When we got off the phone, I texted her. I was like, hopefully, we can talk about this later. I'm sure like whatever happened, like it was a misunderstanding. I hope you have a great day at work. Okay, very kind. She does not text me back until later in the day. She sent me this picture of her getting like an employee of the month thing at her job. And I was like, oh, congrats, super proud of you, whatever. And then the next morning, she calls me, right? We're talking, we're having a nice little conversation. And then I'm like, oh, do you mind if I ask, like, what happened yesterday? Like, what upset you? And she's like, oh, like, I want you to know, like, everything's fine, but I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm like, I just want to know what upset you. And she's like, yeah, but, I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, something I said clearly upset you, and I have no idea what it was. I feel like it would be important for me to know so I don't like accidentally do it again in the future. And I was like, and honestly, I feel like maybe you misheard something and like thought we were talking about something else because I genuinely don't see what we could have said that would have upset you so much. And she was like, I just don't want to talk about it. And I was like, we're grown adults. Like, it was so hard for me to not say you're 27. Because let me tell you this, that's my go-to anytime someone's being childish. I always tell them what their age is. It's the best thing ever. Like, next time you're arguing with someone, they're being immature, tell them what their age is. Anyways, we go back and forth. Like, I'm literally telling, I'm like, yo, like, I think it would just be like healthy communication for me to know what's up. I'm like, it just doesn't make sense for me to not know. Oh, and then when I said the we're adults thing, she was like, yeah, and I'm telling you, like, as an adult, I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, okay, then clearly not everything's okay. I'm like, and I literally said, I was like, oh, like, do you think maybe there's like another time that you would want to talk about it? Like maybe later on? And she was like, yeah, like, no. I'm like, what are you talking about? So then she had to go to work again. And she was like, this is not how I wanted to start my morning. I was like, this is not how I wanted to start mine. So then we got off the phone, right? And then when we got off the phone, she texted me something like, yeah, I don't think we should be talking romantically anymore. And I don't want you to try to convince me otherwise. And I was like, I think I texted. I was like, oh, like, I'm sorry to hear that. No, I said, I'm sorry that's how you feel. Because I remember we had an argument like a week prior where she said that to me. Oh yeah, like she said something that hurt my feeling. I wish I remember what it was. But then she was like, oh, like, I'm sorry you feel that way. Which again, very dismissive. Okay, so in this moment I said, I'm sorry you feel that way. And then I blocked her on everything. And I don't know if this was a good move or a bad move, but basically a few days later, I unblocked her on iMessage and sent a voice memo where I was telling her, I was like, oh, because my thing is, when I get out of the situation, I gotta tell you how I feel. Like I gotta like I have to like tell you about yourself by the end. Because the thing about me is I deal with so much like from someone, like I'll put up with so much, like by the end I have so much to say because I don't say it in the moment. Okay, maybe that's something I need to work on. I'm on the voice memo, I'm like, yo, I'm like telling you this for your sake. Like you absolutely self-sabotage this entire situation. I was like, and hopefully, one day, like, you'll be able to see that for yourself and improve. But oh yeah, and the thing is, I forgot to tell y'all, she told me like she has a history of self-sabotaging things. So then like she started doing it, and I'm like, how does she not see like that's what she's doing? 'Cause mind you, all these situations she was like upset, like, oh, I'm not talking to her enough. She feels like I should be doing boyfriend things. She very clearly wants me to be her boyfriend at this time. This will all be solved by being like, hey Bryce, I think we should be in a monogamous relationship. But she didn't want to do that. Okay, I don't know why not. Like, I don't know if she felt like she already committed to like the logic of us not being in one, that she felt like, like she couldn't, or if she didn't feel like, if she wanted to feel like she wasn't the one like pushing the agenda and she wanted me to push it. I don't know. Yeah, basically I was telling her, I was like, oh, like, you're immature, yada, yada, yada. I think it was like a 1.5-minute voice memo of, again, me being very like condescending. And then I sent it, and then I reblocked her on everything because it was really funny. I remember she told me, she was like, oh, like, something I always do is like, if I'm beefing with someone, like I'll literally like message someone and I'll block them while they're typing. So in that moment, and mind you, at this moment in time, I'm not at all unbothered. I'm furious over the situation. I am steaming. Okay, so I sent her like that voice memo, and I'm like, okay, let me give her a taste of her own medicine and block her before she has a chance to respond. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I almost forgot to say, okay, the day me and her got into the fight, not the day we actually stopped talking, the day before, when she wouldn't tell me what was going on, the reason it was so easy for me to get out of the situation the next day is because that day I had 2 dates, right? And they both went really well. In the second one, when I tell you, I was hitting it so well that it made me realize, I was like, I don't need this. Like, I don't need this like young lady stressing me out. Like, I have such good qualities about myself, let alone what I do in the bedroom. So yeah, I'm out of here. Okay, and that's what gave me like the power to leave. Because I'm not gonna lie, if I didn't go through that, I definitely would have wanted to leave. But the fact that she said like, oh, I don't think we should talk romantically, I think I would have fought for it, and then the next fight I would have been the first one. But like the fact that she said it first, I didn't care, because I was like, for one, I know she would never really stand on that if I was still there. But also, bruh, like I'm so desirable. But anyways, yeah, I sent her that message and then blocked her and everything. And I was so mad about that for so long. Like, I was posting TikToks at that time period where it was very clear. I'm so embarrassed like now. It was very clear that I had just gotten out of a breakup, and I was like just trying to like vent a bit. And like, oh my gosh, I remember someone commented, they were like, oh man, she hurt him bad. I'm like, how do they know? Like, it made me so mad. I feel like everyone who like dates has that one relationship where it's like, bro, like I don't even want people to know I dated you. That's how much you dragged me through the mud. Like, for, again, like when we met, she looked a certain way, but it's like throughout she looked a different way. Like, I feel like with me, like my former like talking stages and situationships, they don't have to like explain me. Like, they don't have to be like, oh, like, it was actually like this. Her, I have to explain like why I was with her. You know what I mean? Like, if people like know who I'm talking about. Okay, actually, not gonna lie, they probably do have to explain me to their friends, because their friends are probably like, wait, like, isn't he gay? And they're like, oh, I didn't think so. Having to explain someone's looks is crazy, okay? Because it reflects so badly on you. It's like, how did you let that happen? Like, how'd you let it occur? Like, truthfully, like the looks thing, it's not even an indictment on her, okay? She just looks like that, okay? It's an indictment on me, because it's like, man, like, I know what I look like. How did I do this? It was so bad, because when I tell you, literally, one of the young ladies I was talking to, like, after I stopped talking to her, like, we were just talking about, like, people we used to talk to, and then, like, I ended up, I don't know if yeah, the girl definitely, because I wouldn't have done this, like, if she didn't ask. She was like, oh, like, can I see what she looks like? I showed her. Shorty laughed at me. Laughed. Now, mind you, this girl is not unattractive, okay, by any means, but, like, for me, it wasn't there. Like, I'm sure she's gonna make a very less attractive looking man, like, happy one day, but it wasn't for me. Like, wasn't my cup of tea. Like, it wasn't meant for me, is what I'm trying to say. And thank God, okay, that's the last situation. That's the last person I've talked to where, like, how do I explain this? That's the last person I talked to where, again, it was like kind of, I would have to explain it. Like, people I've talked to since then, I don't just mean like longer like relationship type things. I mean like even like just like talking stages, like it makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, people would see it and they'd be like, oh, okay, that's why you talk to them, because they look like that. Like, I really appreciate this relationship because it, like, I put like a flag into the ground, you know what I'm saying? And like, okay, like this is like the last like mid-looking person I'm going to be involved with for the rest of time. And again, I'm not saying that to neg her. I'm just saying like that's how it was. Okay, again, if someone new I'm talking to is literally laughing at the fact that I used to talk to this person, come on, you know what I mean? Like, that wouldn't happen again. Now, mind you, that might happen again with like people I've talked to since then, because of like how someone may act. But like when it comes to looks, like I definitely, I stepped it up. No, you know what's funny? I remember one time, like, this is when me and her were still talking, and someone was like, oh yeah, that girl's like 4'10", like blah blah blah, and they were doing like the you like children thing, like, again, that annoying narrative. Basically, I remember I showed a picture right? Because they wanted to see, and then they were like, oh yeah, like she's definitely older. Like what? Like the things, I didn't think she looked that old, but like again, like I had the rose tinted glasses, and I am praying to God, because when I tell you, when I used to like make TikToks and tell story times like all the time, somehow the person I told the story about would always find the TikTok. Okay, I'm praying that like juju does not transfer to like this YouTube story. Okay, because I think of every YouTube story I told, she's like no, I don't. Girl who got not girl who like faked the pregnancy, called me the N-word, and tried to get me to sleep with a man. She's absolutely the last one I would want to see. But like this girl, I absolutely would not want her to see this video, because again, all the stuff like about like looks, stuff about like the podcast, the stuff like people were saying, it would just because the thing is, there's no hard feelings at this point in time. I know like telling the story probably does seem like it, but I just think it's an entertaining story. You know, like I got dragged through the mud. She called me her dad's name. She was on this type of timing. You know, just a lot of stuff took place here. But the thing is, thank God, I don't think many people knew, except maybe her friends, that we were talking, like friends and ex-friends. So again, oh my gosh, I hope none of them see this. But again, because I just feel like if she were to see this, it would be mean. You know, like I'm saying some like unkind things, not to be unkind, to flesh out the story, you know, and give you like an understanding of like my mind state and like things like just the impact of the story. I need you to understand. Just like I need to hammer home that like she had a glow down mid relationship, just because like I need you to get it. You know, I need you to like understand like what was going on. And also I need to be honest with you about that, because then when I tell you like, oh, you know, I was talking to such and such, I was talking to this baddie, blah blah blah, you understand that like I'm telling the truth about that, because I wouldn't lie about like the looks of someone like this. So yeah, I'm praying she don't see this. And the thing is, usually I don't care. Like I feel like some people are gonna be like, oh, but like you usually say like all sorts of like crazy stuff. The thing is, if I call someone like crazy, I don't like when I'm like, oh, like, you know, someone was crazy, they did this. I feel like that's not that bad. You know, even when I say someone's stupid, like I feel like that's not as bad as just straight up being like, this person, their looks, they kind of went downhill. The thing is, the reason I say it is like I feel like it also makes me look bad, because again, it's like if I'm saying this person's looks went down, but I'm still in the situation, I don't, I don't. I don't come off too much better than anybody. But like there are certain details I'm not gonna tell you that wouldn't make me look bad and would only make this person look bad. So it's like there's no point in telling those, you know what I mean? Especially when they're not particularly entertaining. Honestly, if I'm telling a dating story about someone, I don't think they're like a bad person, I'd kind of try to tell it in like a self-deprecating way. Now, mind you, I understand it never comes across that way, but you know, that's the intent. But yeah, praying she doesn't see this video, guys. And here's the thing, I hope it doesn't like take away from the video the fact that I'm like, oh, I hope she doesn't see this. But like, I want to say I hope she doesn't see this, because if she does see this, I need her to know that I didn't want her to see it. You know what I mean? Because sometimes when I make a video and it's involving someone else, like they think it's like me trying to communicate with them, like try to be like, oh, like this is how I feel about you, this is how I feel about the situation. When it's like, no, like you as the audience member, a lot of times like you like understand. I feel like it's like, because it's like, again, for you it's content, it's a story, like I'm trying to entertain you, so it's clear for that. But like sometimes like when I tell a story about someone, they're like, oh, like you're saying this, like they think it's like a sneak diss. Like I remember one time this girl, like I told a story about her, like me and her like just got into like a minor disagreement, and she DM'd me and she's like, oh, like do you really like feel this way, like blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, like it's not that deep, you know what I mean? Like it's like I'll tell a story because I think it's funny, like not because like I'm upset and trying to indirect you, you know what I mean? It's been over a year since this happened, so it's like if that was what I wanted, it would be embarrassing, you know what I mean? Like I'm telling you this story just because I think it's like an interesting story. And also I needed something to post today. Again, I'm going with the daily uploads. You see me? Do you see? And you know what's crazy? I thought this story was gonna be like 20 minutes. I thought this was going to be a very, not short YouTube video. I thought it was going to be a shorter YouTube video than the videos I've been dropping. But hey, look at me. This might be my longest video. I don't know. Like it might be. Like I haven't edited it yet, but like, wow. One thing I wish though is I wish it was easier for me to just get straight into the story, because I feel like once I got into the story, it was like super juicy. But like there was a lot of like background and like, oh, you know, I feel this way about this and this way about this that I had to get into before I could actually get into it. But when I tell you, I don't know when I started recording this, but it was definitely like more so in the middle of the night. Now it's 9 a.m. Okay, and now I'm editing this. I'm gonna post it at 3. Also, I want to point that I didn't want to point out until the end just in case like it would ruin it first. Y'all see my eyes kind of swollen? Like this one right here kind of hurts when I blink, but it kind of feels better than it did when I started the video. I don't know what that's about. Okay. Also, you see my face still unshaven. Okay, I think the milestone 6K. Okay, someone commented on Twitter. They're like, hey man, make 6K the milestone. Okay, and I appreciate you, bro. This is what it's gonna be. I'm gonna line up my face once I hit 6K. Okay, that's what I'm referring to, if in case you don't know, because I don't know who makes it to the end. I'm not gonna, if you make it to the end of like of like this video, I don't know, it's kind of crazy. Any video I make that's like over an hour, the concept of people making it to the end is kind of crazy to me. Low key, if you did, like, comment something, like low key, you know, because I want to keep track of that. But also, thank you all. Okay, I appreciate the people who have come from, you know, my other platforms to like watch the videos I put out. Very appreciate. I feel I've been feeling a lot of support with my YouTube videos. I appreciate when y'all just like when y'all get in there and y'all like, oh man, daily uploads, let's go, or hey, he posted a video. I really appreciate that. I appreciate that you guys like the concept of the fact that like I'm posting a YouTube video. So yeah, I really appreciate y'all, and I also appreciate, you know, everyone who comes in like just from like YouTube, just happens to see, you know, my face and it's like, hey, you know, I'll click on that. It really does mean a lot. I remember when I first started YouTube, I was like, hey man, this feels like, you know, going to like a new school and you're like the new kid and it's like, ah, these people don't know me. So yeah, a lot of the comments have been making me feel nice and at home, you know. And again, my views, I feel like for someone of like my subscriber count, my views have been like very good, because I, you know, I keep an eye on like other like creators, like other people like with like similar followings, and I'm doing like, there are some people who have more subscribers than me, and my views are a lot better, you know what I mean? And I thought like posting more would make the views watered down, like people wouldn't like watch as much, but like nah, they cooked. I appreciate you very much, viewer. Okay, I hope you don't mind me like glazing you too much, but let me think. State of affairs, is there anything I need to talk about? Oh yeah, if there's any like topics specifically, like YouTube video topics you want me to like talk about or make, you know, you can lob some ideas in the comment section or in my DMs or whatever if you want to. Because I always have like general ideas, but sometimes I'm like, man, like how am I gonna get this? Like this, but the thing is, this story at one point was a general idea. Like I was like, oh, I'm gonna talk about what happened there, and I didn't know how I was gonna get there. But like I have a few ideas. I'm like, oh, like I could do like how to mistreat your romantic partner. I could do manipulation tactics. I could transfer them onto here. Thing is, don't get too excited about manipulation tactics, okay? Like I don't know how much I can really get into them. But the thing is, at some point, I definitely want to take them from like TikTok. Like I can kind of reiterate what I said and then put them in here and then like flesh out things a lot more. And I feel like that would be, because I feel like tutorial style video on manipulation, I feel like they could do well. Let me know what y'all want to see, okay? Because I promise, you know, whether it comes out as a video or just like inspires me to make another video, I'm gonna take what you say into account, okay? Because I care about you, the viewer, all right? But thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, everything I have to say. I'm so sorry. And I love you so much. Okay, that I love you was a bit like strong. Like usually I'm like, oh, like I love you, but like that one I was kind of like getting in there with you. But I do. Am I sleep deprived? Maybe. Maybe. Oh, it is 9 a.m. after me being up all night. So yeah, I probably am sleep deprived. But yeah, no, you know, love you, and have a great evening, night, morning, whatever time of day it is. I appreciate it.